The Uzumaki Clan, masters of seals, chains, and untold power. But what if Naruto, the last heir, didn't just inherit the Nine Tails, but the full legacy of his bloodline? This is the story of a boy, reborn as a storm of his clan's forgotten glory. Welcome to Hirosaki YT, where we take the biggest what-ifs and turn them into full-scale epics. Every line you hear is written from scratch, built to bring these alternate realities to life. Got a crazy what-if in mind? Drop it in the comments. I might just turn your idea into the next movie. Make sure to subscribe, like, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next chapter. Now, let's begin this story. The morning mist clung to the ruins like ghosts refusing to depart from their ancient home. Naruto Uzumaki stood at the edge of what had once been the great village of Uzushiogakure, his bright orange jacket a stark contrast against the weathered stone and twisted metal that remained of his ancestral homeland. The whirlpool country had been reduced to scattered islands and crumbling monuments, but something deep within his chest pulled him forward, a resonance he couldn't quite explain. This place, Naruto whispered, his voice carrying across the desolate landscape. He'd come here on a mission with Team 7, but while Sasuke and Sakura were investigating the perimeter for signs of enemy activity, Naruto found himself drawn to the central ruins. Every step felt familiar, as if his feet remembered paths he'd never walked. The wind picked up, whistling through broken archways and collapsed towers. But beneath that familiar sound, Naruto heard something else, a low hum that seemed to emanate from the very ground beneath his feet. His chakra stirred restlessly, responding to something invisible yet undeniably present. "What is that?" he muttered, pressing his palm against the partially intact wall. The stone was warm despite the cool morning air, and carved symbols along its surface seemed to shimmer when he wasn't looking directly at them. The Uzumaki spiral appeared repeatedly in the stonework, sometimes standalone, sometimes intertwined with sealing patterns he didn't recognize but somehow understood. Following the humming sensation, Naruto navigated through collapsed corridors and debris-filled chambers. The resonance in his chest grew stronger with each step, like a compass needle finding true north. His shadow clones would have been useful for searching the vast ruins, but something told him this journey needed to be taken alone, that whatever was calling to him would only respond to his direct presence. The trail led him to what appeared to be the remains of a great library or archive. Massive stone shelves lined the walls, though most of their contents had long since crumbled to dust or been claimed by the elements. However, in the center of the room, Naruto discovered something extraordinary, a stone pedestal that had somehow remained intact, protected by what looked like a faint, shimmering barrier. Resting on the pedestal was a scroll unlike any Naruto had ever seen. Its surface appeared to be made of some kind of metallic material that shifted between silver and deep blue, depending on the angle of view. Uzumaki spirals were etched into the metal with incredible precision, and they seemed to pulse with their own inner light. The humming sensation that had drawn him here emanated directly from this artifact. Incredible, Naruto breathed, circling the pedestal. The barrier protecting the scroll was nearly invisible, but he could sense its presence, a sealing technique far more sophisticated than anything he'd encountered in his studies with Jiraiya. This has to be from the Uzumaki Clan. As he examined the scroll more closely, Naruto noticed that the sealing barrier wasn't just protective. It was selective. When he reached toward it, the barrier didn't repel his hand but seemed to recognize him, thinning and weakening at his touch. His Uzumaki blood was the key. The moment his fingers made contact with the metallic surface, the world exploded into sensation. Chakra unlike anything Naruto had ever experienced flooded through him. Not the raw, wild power of the Nine Tails, but something refined, ancient, and impossibly vast. Images flashed through his mind. Great cities with buildings that spiraled into the sky. Shinobi wielding chains of pure chakra, sealing techniques that could reshape reality itself. He saw his mother, Kushina, not as a young woman he'd glimpsed in his encounters with her chakra imprint, but as she might have been if she fully awakened to her clan's legacy. Golden chains erupted from her form, each one capable of binding even-tailed beasts. He witnessed battles where Uzumaki warriors stood against armies, their mastery of sealing Jutsu turning the tide of entire wars. But it was the final vision that shook him to his core. He saw himself, or rather, what he could become. His familiar orange and black jumpsuit was replaced by flowing robes marked with silver Uzumaki spirals. Chains of condensed chakra flowed around him like liquid light, and his eyes held a depth of power and knowledge that seemed almost alien. This version of himself stood atop a battlefield, not through victory in combat, but because his very presence had sealed away conflict itself. Naruto jerked his hand back, gasping. The visions faded, but their impact lingered. The scroll had shown him not just his heritage, but his potential, a potential that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. I had no idea, he whispered, staring at his trembling hands. He could still feel the echo of that vast power, dormant but definitely present within him. All these years, he thought his only inheritance from his mother was his chakra reserves and stubborn personality. The truth was so much more. The scroll itself seemed to be waiting. Now that it had revealed these visions, it wanted him to take the next step. Naruto could see that the barrier had thinned considerably, and small sealing patterns around the scroll's edge were beginning to glow more brightly, as if preparing to activate. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" he asked the empty air, though somehow he felt the presence of his ancestors answering in the affirmative. The Uzumaki Clan secrets hadn't died with Uzushiogakures' destruction. They had been waiting, sealed away until the right descendant came to claim them. With growing determination, Naruto reached the scroll again. This time, instead of pulling his hand away when the visions came, he embraced them. He let the knowledge flow through him, even as it overwhelmed his senses. The metallic surface grew warm under his touch, and the sealing patterns began to unravel like a flower blooming in fast motion. The moment the last seal released, power exploded outward from the scroll. Naruto felt it rushing into him. Not just chakra, but knowledge, instincts, and abilities that had been locked away for generations. His body trembled as it adapted to accommodate energies it had never been designed to contain, and for a terrifying moment, he wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the overwhelming sensation stabilized. Naruto found himself kneeling on the stone floor, the scroll clutched in his hands, its surface now dim and ordinary-looking. But the changes within him were far from ordinary. He could feel new pathways in his chakra system, dormant abilities stirring to life, and a connection to something vast and ancient that stretched back through generations of Uzumaki ancestry. When he finally stood, Naruto felt different, not transformed, but awakened. The boy who had entered these ruins was gone, replaced by someone who carried the full weight of his bloodline's legacy. He understood now why the Uzumaki clan had been feared and respected throughout the ninja world, and why other villages had united to destroy Uzushiogakure. The power he'd inherited wasn't just dangerous, it was revolutionary. As he made his way back to the ruins toward where his teammates were waiting, Naruto experimented with his new awareness. He could sense sealing techniques everywhere, not just the obvious ones protecting important areas, but subtle markers and hidden passages that had been invisible to him before. The very architecture of Uzushiogakure had been designed as one massive sealing array, and now he could read it like a book. More disturbing was what he sensed beyond the ruins. The chakra signatures of Sasuke and Sakura seemed almost fragile now, their energy patterns simple compared to the complex harmonics he could perceive in his own system. And deeper, much deeper, he felt Kurama stirring uneasily within the seal. The Nine Tails had sensed a change in his host, and was both curious and wary about what it might mean. "Naruto!" Sakura's voice echoed across the ruins as she spotted him emerging from the central complex. "There you are. Kakashi-sensei wants us to regroup. We found signs of enemy scouts in the area." "Coming," he called back, quickly tucking the scroll into his jacket. But as he jogged toward his teammates, Naruto couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. The power coursing through him was barely contained, pressing against the boundaries of his control like a wild animal in a cage. When he reached Sasuke and Sakura, they both gave him curious looks. "You seem different," Sasuke observed, his Sharingan briefly activating to examine Naruto's chakra. His eyes widened slightly. "Your chakra, it's changed. What did you find in there?" Naruto hesitated. How could he explain that he just unlocked the accumulated secrets of an entire clan? That he now carried power that might rival even the legendary Sage of Six Paths? More importantly, how could he tell them that he wasn't entirely sure he could control it? Just some old ruins, he said finally, forcing his usual grin. Nothing too exciting. But even as he spoke, Naruto felt the scrolls weight against his chest like a burning coal, and the new chakra pathways in his body hummed with barely restrained energy. The Uzumaki Clan secrets were awake within him now, and there would be no going back. The only question was whether he could master his inheritance before it mastered him. 3 days had passed since Naruto's discovery of the Uzumaki scroll, and the young shinobi found himself struggling to maintain his usual demeanor. The power coursing through his veins felt like liquid lightning, constantly threatening to burst free from his control. Even simple tasks to become challenging. He'd accidentally crushed 2 ramen bowls the previous evening, his newfound strength activating without conscious thought. Now, standing in training ground 7 across from Sasuke, Naruto desperately hoped that some familiar sparring might help him regain his equilibrium. The Uchiha had been giving him suspicious looks ever since their return from the Whirlpool country, clearly aware that something fundamental had changed in his longtime rival. "You're holding back," Sasuke observed, settling into his combat stance. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training ground, and a light breeze stirred the leaves overhead. "Whatever you found in those ruins, it's affecting your fighting style." Kakashi lounged against a nearby tree, his visible eye focused on them with unusual intensity. Even their sensei had noticed the subtle changes in Naruto's chakra signature and movement patterns. Sakura sat on a wooden post at the edge of the clearing, ostensibly reading a medical jutsu scroll, but actually watching the upcoming spar with keen interest. "I'm not holding back," Naruto protested, though even he could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "I'm just warming up, that's all." The truth was more complicated. Ever since awakening his Uzumaki heritage, Naruto had been experiencing flashes of knowledge and instinct that felt foreign yet familiar. During their walk back to Konoha, he'd found himself analyzing his teammates' chakra signatures with precision that should have been impossible without years of sensor training. He'd noticed weak points in their defenses, optimal angles for hypothetical sealing techniques, and tactical opportunities that his old self would never have perceived. Most disturbing of all were the chains. In quiet moments, when his concentration slipped, Naruto could see them, gossamer threads of golden chakra extending from his body like invisible appendages. They responded to his emotions, growing brighter when he was angry or excited, dimming when he forced himself to remain calm. The scroll's knowledge told him these were the legendary Adamantine Chains of the Uzumaki Clan, capable of binding even-tailed beasts and suppressing hostile chakra. But knowing what they were didn't help him understand how to control them. "Fine," Sasuke said, activating his Sharingan. "Then show me what you've got." The Uchiha launched himself forward with practiced grace, kunai flashing toward Naruto's center mass. It was a familiar opening move, one they'd exchanged hundreds of times in previous spars. Naruto should have responded with his own kunai, or perhaps a quick substitution jutsu. Instead, instinct took over. Golden light erupted from Naruto's right hand as an adamantine chain materialized in the space between them. The ethereal construct moved with impossible speed, intercepting Sasuke's attack and wrapping around the Uchiha's wrist before he could react. The chain's grip was unbreakable, formed from condensed chakra that could restrain even the Nine Tails, and Sasuke found himself yanked violently off course. "What the—" Sasuke began, but his words were cut short as the chain's momentum sent him tumbling through the air. He hit the ground hard, rolling twice before coming to rest against the base of a tree. "Sasuke!" Sakura leaped to her feet, her medical training immediately assessing him for injuries. But her attention was quickly drawn to Naruto, who stood frozen in the center of the clearing, staring at the golden chain extending from his palm with a mixture of awe and horror. "Impossible!" Kakashi whispered, his lazy demeanor evaporating as he straightened to his full height. That's the Uzumaki Clan's adamantine sealing chains. But how did you—" Naruto tried to dismiss the chain, but it pulsed with its own energy, seeming to feed off his emotional turmoil. The more distressed he became, the brighter and more solid it appeared. Panic began to set in as he realized he had no idea how to make it disappear. I can't turn it off," Naruto said, his voice rising with anxiety. The chain writhed through the air like a living thing, its movements becoming more erratic as his control slipped. Something's wrong. Sasuke pushed himself to his feet, rubbing his wrist where the chain had grabbed him. His Sharingan was spinning rapidly as it tried to analyze the chakra construct, but even his enhanced perception could barely make sense of what he was seeing. Your chakra, it's completely different from before. This isn't just a new jutsu. It's like you become someone else entirely. The observation struck close at home, then Sasuke realized. Naruto could feel the weight of ancestral knowledge pressing against his consciousness, whispering of techniques and powers that his current self had never learned. The chain responded to these ancient instincts, growing longer and beginning to split into multiple segments. Everyone stay back, Kakashi commanded, though he was already reaching for his forehead protector. If Naruto's power continued to escalate, they might need to contain the situation before it got out of hand. Naruto, you need to focus on your breathing. Whatever's happening, panic will only make it worse. But Naruto barely heard his sensei's words. The world around him seemed to fade as more chains began materializing. 2, then 3, then half a dozen golden constructs flowing from various points on his body. Each one moved independently, responding to subconscious desires and fears he didn't understand. One wrapped around a nearby training post, crushing the wooden structure to splinters. Another lashed out at a passing bird, missing by mere inches. This power, Naruto gasped, falling to his knees as the energy drain hit him. It's too much. I can't control it. In his mindscape, Kurama stirred with unprecedented agitation. The Nine Tails had felt the chains before. They were the same technique that Kushina had used to restrain him during his attack on Konoha. But the power he sensed now was far beyond what his former Jinchuriki had wielded. This was the full inheritance of the Uzumaki bloodline, awakened and running wild. Kid! Kurama's voice echoed through their mental link, unusually serious. These chains, they're not just for binding enemies. They're designed to suppress and seal chakra itself. If you lose control completely, you could cut yourself off from your own energy forever. The warning sent a chill through Naruto's spine. He forced himself to look beyond his fear, reaching for the calm center that Jiraiya had taught him to find during sage training. Slowly, deliberately, he began to regulate his breathing, trying to separate his consciousness from the storm of power threatening to consume him. That's it, Kakashi encouraged, though he remained ready to intervene if necessary. Don't fight the power. Try to understand it. What does it want? The question was more profound than Kakashi realized. As Naruto centered himself, he began to perceive the chains not as foreign intrusions, but as extensions of his own will. They weren't attacking randomly. They were responding to his emotional state, his instinctive desire to protect his friends from perceived threats. When he'd seen Sasuke's kunai, some deeper part of him had activated the chains not to harm his teammate, but to neutralize what it perceived as danger. Understanding brought control. One by one, Naruto began to consciously dismiss the chains, starting with the ones that had caused the most destruction. Each dismissal required tremendous concentration, like trying to flex muscles he'd never known he possessed. But gradually, the golden constructs faded back into the chakra from which they'd emerged. Finally, only the original chain remained, the one still connected to Sasuke. Naruto looked at his teammate with genuine remorse, seeing the mixture of concern and wariness in the Uchiha's eyes. I'm sorry, Naruto said quietly. I didn't mean for this to happen. What had happened? Sakura asked, approaching cautiously. Naruto, where did this power come from? Naruto hesitated, then slowly reached into his jacket to withdraw the metallic scroll. In the morning light, it seemed almost ordinary, but all three of his teammates immediately sensed the residual chakra emanating from it. I found this in the Uzumaki ruins, he admitted. It contained knowledge, techniques, and abilities that have been sealed away for generations, but I don't know how to control them properly. Kakashi extended his hand, and Naruto reluctantly passed over the scroll. Their sensei examined it with the practiced eye of someone who'd encountered ancient artifacts before, his expression growing more grave with each moment. This isn't just a technique scroll, Kakashi said finally. It's a bloodline inheritance seal. The Uzumaki Clan was renowned for their sealing Jutsu, but this goes beyond anything recorded in Konoha's archives. The chains you just manifested, I've only seen them once before, when your mother used them during a Nine-Tails attack. My mother? Naruto's eyes widened. The visions he'd experienced when touching the scroll suddenly took on new meaning. She could do this too? Kushina was one of the most powerful kunoichi of her generation, Kakashi confirmed. But even she couldn't manifest multiple chains simultaneously. What you just did, it suggests you inherited far more than just her abilities. Sasuke, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during this exchange, finally spoke up. This changes everything, doesn't it? If Naruto can access this kind of power, the balance between us is irrelevant, Naruto interrupted, finally dismissing the last chain. I didn't ask for this, and I'm not going to use it to gain some advantage over you, Sasuke. But I can't just pretend it doesn't exist either. The training ground fell silent as all three of his teammates contemplated the implications. Naruto had always been the unpredictable element in their team dynamic, but this development was beyond anything they prepared for. How do you maintain normal relationships when one member has suddenly awakened legendary powers? We'll figure this out, Kakashi said finally, his tone carrying the authority of their sensei and the weight of experience. But first, we need to understand exactly what you've inherited. The Adamantine Chains are just one aspect of Uzumaki techniques. If there's more, we need to know about it before you accidentally level a building. Naruto nodded, though privately he wondered if his teammates could truly handle the full truth. The scroll's knowledge had shown him glimpses of techniques that could reshape battlefields, sealing jutsu that could imprison armies, and chakra manipulation abilities that bordered on the supernatural. The chains were dramatic, but they were just the beginning. As they prepared to leave the training ground, Naruto caught Sasuke's eye. His oldest friend and rival was studying him with an expression he'd never seen before, not jealousy or competition, but something closer to recognition. As if Sasuke understood, perhaps better than anyone, what it meant to suddenly inherit power you'd never asked for. Just promise me something, Sasuke said quietly as they walked back toward the village. What? Promise me you'll stay yourself. I've seen what inherited power can do to people. Don't let it change who you are. Naruto wanted to give him the confident reassurance their friendship demanded, but as he felt the chakra chain stirring restlessly beneath the surface of his consciousness, he realized he couldn't make that promise. The power of the Uzumaki bloodline wasn't something he could compartmentalize or ignore. Whether he wanted it or not, change had already begun. The ancient library beneath Konoha's Hokage Tower had always been a place of quiet scholarship, its dust-covered tomes and forgotten scrolls holding secrets from the village's earliest days. Now, 2 weeks after the incident at Training Ground 7, it had become Naruto's sanctuary, a place where he could explore his newfound abilities without fear of accidentally harming others. Tsunade had granted him special access after Kakashi's report, though her expression had been troubled when she'd signed the authorization. The fifth Hokage understood better than most what Uzumaki power could accomplish, having witnessed Kushina's abilities firsthand. But what Naruto was describing went far beyond anything the village's records contained. Sealing formula. Chakra suppression net. Naruto read aloud from a scroll spread across the marble table before him. The technique described was theoretical at best. A complex weaving of sealing patterns that could theoretically mobilize multiple opponents by cutting off their access to chakra. According to the text, it had never been successfully implemented because the chakra requirements were beyond any single shinobi's capacity. At least, they had been before Naruto's awakening. He placed his hands on the scroll, letting his enhanced chakra flow through the ink and parchment. Immediately, the sealing formulas began to glow with soft blue light, their mathematical precision becoming clear to his transformed perception. What had once seemed like incomprehensible theory now revealed itself as elegant engineering, a way to use an opponent's own chakra against them by creating feedback loops in their energy flow. Incredible, Naruto whispered, his fingers tracing the complex patterns. It's not just about having enough chakra. You need to understand the underlying structure of how energy moves through a person's system. This was perhaps the most remarkable aspect of his inheritance. Not just raw power, but comprehension. The knowledge contained within the Uzumaki scroll hadn't simply given him new techniques. It had fundamentally altered how he perceived chakra itself. He could now see the connections between sealing theory and practical application, understanding why certain formulas worked and others failed. A soft footstep behind him announced Kakashi's arrival. Their sensei had taken to checking on him regularly, partly out of concern and partly to monitor his progress. The copy ninja's expression was carefully neutral as he approached, though Naruto had learned to read the subtle signs of his mentor's unease. Any progress? Kakashi asked, settling into a chair across from Naruto's workspace. Too much progress, Naruto replied honestly. Every technique I study makes sense now. It's like someone replaced my brain with one that actually understands how sealing jutsu work. He gestured to the scroll before him. This suppression net technique. I think I could actually perform it. The chakra requirements aren't impossible anymore, not with what I can access now. Kakashi leaned forward to examine the scroll, his visible eye widening as he read the technique description. Naruto, this is classified as a forbidden jutsu for good reason. The potential for abuse is enormous if you could cut off multiple opponents' chakra simultaneously. I know, Naruto said quietly. That's what scares me. Yesterday, I was reading about barrier techniques, and I realized I could probably seal off entire sections of the village if I wanted to. Not just physically. I could cut them off from chakra entirely, trap people in spaces where their energy can't flow properly. The weight of this revelation had been pressing on him for days. As his understanding of sealing jutsu deepened, Naruto had begun to comprehend just how dangerous his inherited abilities were. The Uzumaki Clan hadn't been destroyed simply because they were powerful. They'd been eliminated because their mastery of sealing techniques posed an existential threat to the established order to the ninja world. Have you tried any practical applications? Kakashi asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Naruto nodded toward a corner of the library where several practice targets had been set up. Each one was surrounded by barely visible chakra constructs, geometric patterns that hovered in the air like three-dimensional sealing formulas. Basic immobilization seals, Naruto explained. I can create them without scrolls or hand signs now. They respond to hostile intent, activating automatically when someone with aggressive chakra approaches. Kakashi stood to examine the constructs more closely, his Sharingan spinning as it tried to analyze their structure. These aren't basic at all, he said after a moment. The complexity is extraordinary. Each seal appears to be customized for different types of chakra signatures. That's the thing. I'm not consciously customizing them. It's like my body knows how to adjust the seals instinctively, the same way I use to create shadow clones without thinking about the technique mechanics. This development troubled Naruto more than he cared to admit. His shadow clone technique had always felt natural because he'd practiced it extensively, building muscle memory through repetition. But these sealing abilities felt natural without any practice at all, as if they'd been waiting dormant in his bloodline for years. There's something else, Naruto continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. When I create these seals, I can feel something responding. Not Kurama, something else entirely. Like there are chakra remnants from previous Uzumaki Clan members still connected to the techniques. Kakashi's expression grew alarmed. Chakra remnants? That shouldn't be possible. When people die, their chakra dissipates. That's what I thought too. But sealing jutsu can preserve things that shouldn't normally survive. What if the Uzumaki Clan found a way to embed fragments of their knowledge and experience into their techniques? Each time I use one of these seals, I get flashes of memory that aren't my own. To demonstrate, Naruto approached one of his practice targets and activated the immobilization seal surrounding it. The geometric pattern flared to life, and for a brief moment, his eyes took on a distant expression. I can see a woman with red hair, not my mother, someone older. She's standing in a great hall filled with scrolls, teaching a group of young students about chakra flow theory. The memories are fragmented, but they feel completely real. Kakashi absorbed this information with growing concern. If you're accessing ancestral memories through your techniques, that could explain the rapid advancement in your abilities. But it also raises serious questions about identity and mental stability. How do you know which thoughts are your own? It was a question Naruto had been avoiding, but one that couldn't be ignored much longer. The boundary between his own consciousness and the inherited knowledge was becoming increasingly blurred. Sometimes he would find himself thinking in ways that felt foreign, considering strategic options that his old self would never have contemplated. "I'm still me," Naruto said, though he wasn't entirely certain. "But I'm also becoming something more. The question is whether that's a good thing or not." Before Kakashi could respond, the library's silence was shattered by a sharp crack of displaced air. Both shinobi spun toward the sound, but they were too late. Dark figures in elaborate masks had already emerged from what appeared to be a spatial distortion technique. "Akatsuki," Kakashi hissed, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon pouch. But before he could draw a kunai, the attackers were already in motion. The lead figure launched a devastating ninjutsu attack, not Naruto or Kakashi, but at the library itself. Shells exploded into splinters as destructive chakra tore through centuries of accumulated knowledge. It was clear they intended to eliminate any evidence of Naruto's research, along with the boy himself. But they had underestimated what Naruto had become. Sealing formula, absolute barrier. Naruto called out, his hands weaving signs with inhuman speed. Golden light erupted from his position, expanding outward in a complex geometric pattern that intercepted the destructive chakra before it could reach the ancient texts. The barrier didn't just stop the attack. It absorbed it, converting the hostile energy into fuel for Naruto's own techniques. His consciousness expanded as the absorbed chakra flowed through him, and suddenly he could perceive the entire library as a three-dimensional sealing array. More attackers emerged from concealment, but Naruto was ready for them. With a gesture that felt as natural as breathing, he activated multiple immobilization seals simultaneously. The geometric patterns materialized around each Akatsuki member, analyzing their chakra signatures and adapting to counter their specific abilities. One attacker tried to use a lightning-based jutsu to break free, only to find his technique redirected through the seal structure and sent back at him amplified. Another attempted a substitution technique, but the seal followed his chakra signature, maintaining its grip regardless of his physical location. "Impossible!" One of the Akatsuki members gasped, his voice muffled by his mask. No single shinobi should be able to maintain this many complex seals simultaneously. Naruto stepped forward, his expression calm, despite the chaos around him. "You're right. A single shinobi couldn't do this. But I'm not just one person anymore. I carry the accumulated knowledge and power of an entire clan." With another gesture, he activated a new sealing technique, one that hadn't existed in any scroll, but formed spontaneously from his enhanced understanding. The mathematical formulas wrote themselves in the air around the immobilized attackers, creating a containment field that would hold them indefinitely, while also preventing them from accessing their chakra. The entire battle had lasted less than 30 seconds. Kakashi stared at the scene in stunned silence. The Akatsuki members who had been legitimate threat moments before were now completely helpless, trapped in sealing constructs that seemed to anticipate and counter their every attempt at escape. "How did you—" Kakashi began, then stopped. He realized he was no longer looking at the hyperactive genin he'd trained for years. The young man before him moved with the confidence of a master strategist, wielding techniques that shouldn't have been possible for someone his age. "The seals aren't just restraining them," Naruto explained, his enhanced perception analyzing the captured attackers. "They're also reading their chakra patterns, learning their techniques, and storing that information for future use. In a way, I'm turning their own abilities against the organization they serve." One of the Akatsuki members, apparently their leader, managed to speak despite his immobilization. "You have no idea what forces you're meddling with. Boy, the Uzumaki Clan was destroyed for good reason. Their power was too dangerous to be allowed to exist." "Maybe," Naruto replied calmly, "but I'm not my ancestors. I choose how to use this power, and right now, I choose to protect the people I care about." He turned to Kakashi, and for a moment, his sensei glimpsed something profound in his student's eyes. Not just power, but wisdom that seemed to come from beyond his years. "We should inform Lady Tsunade about this attack," Naruto said. "But first, I think it's time I showed her exactly what I've inherited. The Akatsuki obviously know about my awakening, which means other enemies will be coming soon. As if summoned by his words, more spatial distortions began appearing around the library. But Naruto wasn't concerned. He could sense the approaching chakra signatures, analyze their techniques before they even manifested, and prepare appropriate counterseals. The boy who had once relied on overwhelming opponents with shadow clones and determination was gone. In his place stood someone who fought battles before they began, turning enemy strengths into weaknesses through understanding that bordered on precognition. The only question was whether Konoha was ready for what its newest prodigy had become. The medical bay beneath Konoha Hospital had never been designed to handle readings like the ones flowing across Sakura's monitoring equipment. Banks of sensors that typically measured chakra levels in standard units were displaying values that seemed impossible, their displays flickering between numbers and error messages as they struggled to quantify what they were detecting. "This can't be right," Sakura muttered, recalibrating the instruments for the third time in an hour. According to these readings, Naruto's chakra capacity has increased by over 300% in the past month. Tsunade stood behind her apprentice, studying the data with a mixture of fascination and concern. As both a medical ninja and former teammate of an Uzumaki Clan member, she had some frame of reference for understanding these developments, but what she was seeing now exceeded anything in her experience. "The increase isn't just in raw capacity," Tsunade observed, pointing to a particularly complex waveform on the display. "Look at the harmonic patterns. His chakra is becoming more refined, more efficient. Each unit of energy is carrying significantly more potential than before." Naruto lay on the examination table, trying to remain still despite his natural restlessness. Sensor patches covered his arms and chest, connected to the monitoring equipment by thin cables that pulsed with faint chakra signatures as they transmitted data to the analysis computers. "It feels different from the inside, too," Naruto said, his voice thoughtful in a way that still surprised those who knew him well. "It's not just that I have more chakra. It's like the chakra I have is deeper somehow, more connected to everything around me." Kakashi, who had been observing from the corner of the room, stepped forward. "What do you mean by connected?" Naruto closed his eyes, extending his senses outward. "I can feel the chakra networks of everyone in this building. Not just their signatures, but the actual flow patterns, the way energy moves through their coils, even small blockages or inefficiencies in their systems." To demonstrate, he turned toward Sakura without opening his eyes. "Your chakra is concentrated heavily in your hands right now because you're maintaining precise control for the medical examination. There's also a small disruption in your shoulder, probably from training yesterday." Sakura's eyes widened as she unconsciously touched her left shoulder, where she'd indeed strained a muscle during taijutsu practice. That's incredibly detailed sensing. Most sensor-type ninjas can detect general chakra signatures, but reading specific physical conditions through energy patterns requires years of specialized training. "That's just the beginning," Tsunade said grimly. "Show them the shadow clone test." Naruto sat up, the sensor cable stretching as he moved. With a simple hand sign, he created a single shadow clone. But immediately, the monitoring equipment went haywire. Alarms began sounding as the sensors detected what appeared to be impossible readings. "The clone isn't draining his chakra reserves at all," Sakura breathed, staring at the displays in disbelief. "It's maintaining itself through ambient energy absorption." "Create more," Tsunade ordered. Naruto complied, spawning clone after clone until dozens of perfect duplicates filled the medical bay. Each one was solid, stable, and apparently permanent. The monitoring equipment had given up trying to track the chakra expenditure, simply displaying maximum values across all parameters. "Before my awakening, creating this many clones would have exhausted me completely," Naruto explained, his voice coming simultaneously from all the duplicates. "Now, it feels like I'm barely tapping into my reserves. The Uzumaki Chakra doesn't just provide more energy, it provides better energy." One of the clones stepped forward, and Kakashi noticed something remarkable. Its chakra signature was slightly different from the original, as if each duplicate was developing its own unique energy pattern. "They're evolving," Kakashi observed. "These aren't just temporary constructs anymore. They're becoming semi-independent entities. which creates interesting tactical possibilities. The original Naruto said with a smile that was both familiar and unsettling, "Watch this." The clone spread throughout the room and began performing different activities simultaneously. One started writing sealing formulas on scroll. Another began practicing taijutsu forms. A third sat in meditation posture and seemed to be gathering natural energy. Most remarkably, all of these activities appear to be feeding information and experience back to the original. Parallel processing, Tsunade whispered. You're using the clones to learn multiple techniques simultaneously. It gets better, Naruto replied. The experiences don't just come back when the clones dispel. I'm maintaining a constant low-level connection with all of them. I can access their memories and skills in real time. To prove his point, Naruto had never moved from the examination table, but he suddenly began writing complex mathematical formulas in the air with his finger, formulas that one of his clones was learning from a sealing theory textbook across the room. The implications were staggering. Traditional shadow clone training was limited by the user's ability to process the returned memories without overwhelming their consciousness. But Naruto's enhanced mental capacity, boosted by his Uzumaki inheritance, seemed capable of handling dozens of parallel learning streams without strain. This is beyond what your mother could do, Tsunade said quietly. Kushina was powerful, but her abilities were still bound by normal human limitations. What you're demonstrating suggests those limitations no longer apply to you. Deep within Naruto's consciousness, Kurama stirred with growing unease. The Nine-Tails had been watching these developments with increasing concern, recognizing that his host was transforming into something unprecedented. Kit, Kurama's voice echoed through their mental link. Your chakra is beginning to resonate with mine in ways I've never experienced. It's not just mixing, it's harmonizing, creating something new. Naruto's awareness shifted inward to address his tenant. In the mindscape that represented their shared space, he found Kurama standing before the Great Seal, but the bars that had once confined the fox appeared translucent, almost ethereal. What do you mean? Naruto asked. The Uzumaki bloodline was designed to work with tailed beast chakra, Kurama explained. But your awakening has activated capabilities that go beyond even that original design. Your chakra isn't just containing mine anymore, it's integrating with it, creating a hybrid energy system that neither of us fully understands. This revelation sent a chill through Naruto's consciousness. He'd been so focused on mastering his new sealing abilities that he hadn't considered how they might affect his relationship with the Nine-Tails. Is that dangerous? He asked. I don't know, Kurama admitted, his massive form pacing within the cage. But I can feel my own nature changing in response to yours. The rage and hatred that have defined me for centuries are muting, being replaced by something else. Back in the medical bay, Tsunade noticed that Naruto had become very still, his expression distant. The monitoring equipment was showing unusual spikes in his chakra activity, patterns that seemed to originate from deep within his core. Naruto, she asked carefully, what's happening? Kurama and I are evolving together, Naruto replied slowly. The Uzumaki chakra isn't just enhancing my abilities, it's changing the fundamental nature of our bond. He opened his eyes, and for a moment, they flickered with a golden light that was neither fully human nor fully fox. I think this is what the Uzumaki Clan was originally created for. Not just to seal-tailed beasts, but to form symbiotic relationships with them, to create something greater than the sum of both parts. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. A perfect Jinchuriki was already considered incredibly rare and powerful. But what Naruto was describing went beyond that. A fundamental fusion of human and tailed beast consciousness that could potentially rewrite everything the ninja world understood about chakra itself. How do you feel? Sakura asked, her medical training prompting her to check for signs of psychological strain. Different, Naruto answered honestly. Sometimes I think thoughts that feel like they're coming from Kurama, and sometimes he seems to be responding to ideas that originated from me. The boundary between us is becoming less defined. That's either the most dangerous development possible or the most promising, Tsunade said grimly. The question is, can you maintain your identity through this transformation? Naruto dismissed his shadow clones with a gesture, and immediately his consciousness was flooded with all their accumulated experiences. A month ago, such an information download would have left him unconscious for hours. Now, he processed it all within seconds, cataloging new techniques, theoretical insights, and sensory data within human efficiency. "I'm still me," he said, though even he noticed how his speech patterns had become more formal, more measured. "But I'm also becoming something more. The real question isn't whether I can maintain my identity. It's whether the ninja world can handle what I'm becoming." As if summoned by his words, a new presence entered the medical bay. Jiraiya stood in the doorway, his usually jovial expression replaced by one of serious concern. The legendary Sennin had been monitoring Naruto's development from a distance, but the recent reports had finally compelled him to return to Konoha. "I felt your Chakra's signature from 3 miles away," Jiraiya said, without preamble. "It's like standing next to a barely contained natural disaster." "Pervy sage," Naruto exclaimed, his demeanor briefly returning to its old enthusiasm. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by the more measured personality he'd been developing. "The question we need to answer," Jiraiya continued, studying his former student with the eye of someone who had seen many powerful individuals rise and fall, "is whether you become the solution to the ninja world's problems or the biggest problem it's ever faced." Naruto considered this seriously. Through his enhanced perception, he could sense the anxiety in everyone present. Not fear of him personally, but fear of the unknown quantity he represented. His power was growing exponentially, his abilities expanding beyond any established framework for understanding them. "Maybe I'm both," he said finally, "but regardless of what I'm becoming, I'm still committed to protecting the people I care about. That hasn't changed." "Let's hope it doesn't," Tsunade replied quietly. "Because if you ever lose sight of that commitment, there may not be anyone left who can stop you." The words hung in the air like a prophecy, and Naruto felt the weight of his inherited power more keenly than ever. The Uzumaki bloodline hadn't been eliminated by enemy villages out of simple jealousy. It had been destroyed because power of this magnitude, in the wrong hands, could reshape the world according to a single person's will. Now that power lived again, contained within a young man who had always fought for others rather than himself. The question was whether that fundamental nature would survive the transformations yet to come. The hidden valley deep within the forest of death had remained untouched by human presence for decades, its treacherous terrain and hostile wildlife serving as natural barriers against intrusion. Here, among ancient trees that towered toward the sky and crystalline streams that sang with their own chakra resonance, Naruto had established his secret training ground. 3 months had passed since his initial awakening, and the young Uzumaki had grown increasingly concerned about the rate of his development. Each day brought new abilities, deeper understanding, and more profound changes to his fundamental nature. Training with his teammates had become impossible, not due to any conscious choice on his part, but because his presence alone disrupted their chakra flows, making it difficult for them to perform even basic techniques. "Isolation is necessary," he told himself as he settled into a meditative posture beside a waterfall that cascaded down moss-covered rocks. "If I can't control the effect I have on others, then I need to master myself first." The irony wasn't lost on him. Naruto had spent most of his life desperate for connection, for recognition and acceptance. Now, possessing power beyond most people's comprehension, he found himself voluntarily withdrawing from the world he'd fought so hard to be part of. Around him, the forest responded to his presence in ways both subtle and profound. Plants grew larger and more vibrant within a 100-meter radius of his location, their roots somehow able to tap into the ambient chakra that leaked from his enhanced system. Animals that should have fled from a human presence instead gathered at a respectful distance, drawn by instincts they couldn't understand to what they perceived as a source of life energy. Naruto extended his consciousness outward, using sensing techniques that had become as natural as breathing. He could perceive the entire forest as an interconnected web of chakra flows. Every tree, every stream, every living creature connected to the greater pattern of energy that flowed through all things. "The Sage of 6 Paths was right," he murmured, remembering fragments of knowledge that had emerged from his inherited memories. All chakra is connected. The Uzumaki Clan understood this better than most, That's why our sealing techniques were so effective. We didn't just manipulate chakra, we understood its fundamental unity. This insight had transformed his training approach entirely. Rather than practicing individual techniques in isolation, Naruto now focused on understanding the underlying principles that connected all chakra manipulation. He would spend hours studying how his energy interacted with the natural world, learning to read the patterns that governed all life. His first major breakthrough had come 2 weeks into his isolation, when he'd attempted to practice his Adamantine Chains technique. Instead of the golden construct he'd expected, something entirely new had emerged. Chains that seemed to be made of crystallized natural energy, drawing power directly from the forest around him. Sage art, natural binding chains, he'd named them, though the technique defied easy classification. These weren't just sealing jutsu or sage techniques, but a hybrid that combined multiple disciplines in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Now, as he sat in meditation beside the waterfall, Naruto attempted to push this fusion even further. He activated his sage mode, not the imperfect version he'd learned on Mount Myaboku, but something evolved through his Uzumaki heritage. Golden lines of natural energy flowed across his body, but instead of the traditional sage markings, they formed intricate seal patterns that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Perfect sage mode, Uzumaki enhancement, he whispered, feeling the transformation complete itself. In this state, his consciousness expanded beyond the merely human, touching the vast network of energy that connected all living things. He could sense not just the forest around him, but the distant village of Konoha, the movements of people dozens of miles away, even the subtle fluctuations of chakra that marked the presence of other Jinchuriki across the continent. But with this expansion of awareness came a troubling realization. The more he grew in power and understanding, the more isolated he became from normal human experience. His teammates, his friends, even his mentors, they all seemed increasingly distant, their concerns and struggles appearing almost trivial compared to the cosmic forces he was learning to manipulate. A memory surfaced from his inherited knowledge, not his own experience, but that of an ancient Uzumaki ancestor who had faced a similar dilemma. The man had achieved such mastery over sealing techniques that he could reshape reality itself, but in doing so had lost all connection to the humanity he'd sworn to protect. Is this the price of power? Naruto asked the empty forest. The more capable I become protecting everyone, the less I'm able to relate to them? His meditation was interrupted by a disturbance at the edge of his sensory range. Multiple chakra signatures were approaching, familiar ones that made his heart race with a mixture of joy and apprehension. Team 7 had found him. Naruto opened his eyes as Sasuke, Sakura, and Kakashi emerged from the tree line, their expressions showing a mixture of determination and concern. It had been 3 weeks since he left the village without explanation, leaving only a note promising to return when he'd gained better control over his abilities. "You're harder to track than you used to be," Sasuke observed, settling into a crouch several meters away. His Sharingan was active, trying to analyze the changes in Naruto's chakra signature, but the complexity of what he was seeing seemed to overwhelm even his enhanced perception. "Your chakra signature keeps shifting," Sakura added, approaching more cautiously. The medical sensors in the village recorded at least 17 different variations over the past week. "What exactly have you been doing out here?" Naruto rose from his meditative position, and immediately his teammates noticed the changes in him. His movements were more fluid, more purposeful, and his eyes held a depth of knowledge that seemed incongruous with his age. Most unsettling of all, the forest itself seemed to respond to his presence, leaves rustling without wind and streams altering their flow patterns as if drawn to him. "I've been learning," Naruto said simply, "about the true nature of chakra, about the connections between all living things, about what it means to inherit the power of an entire bloodline." He gestured toward the transformed landscape around them. The Uzumaki Clan wasn't just skilled at sealing techniques. They were ecosystem engineers. They could harmonize their chakra with natural environments, creating spaces where life flourished beyond its normal limits. Kakashi stepped forward, his visible eye narrow with concern. "Naruto, this level of environmental manipulation, it's beyond what any individual should be capable of. How much has your power increased?" "See for yourself," Naruto replied. He raised his hand, and immediately dozens of shadow clones materialized throughout the valley. But these weren't the temporary constructs he'd once created. Each clone moved with perfect independence, their chakra signatures stable and self-sustaining. Perfect shadow clone jutsu, he explained as his duplicates began demonstrating various techniques simultaneously. Each clone can exist indefinitely, maintain its own chakra supply, and develop along independent learning paths. I'm essentially able to be in hundreds of places at once, learning different skills and gathering different experiences. One clone was practicing taijutsu forms that blended multiple martial arts traditions. Another was weaving sealing formulas that created small pocket dimensions. A third had entered a sage mode trance and was communing with the natural chakra of the entire forest. This is what 3 months of focused training has achieved. Naruto continued. I can simultaneously master sage techniques, perfect my sealing abilities, and develop new combat applications. The learning curve isn't just accelerated, it's exponential. Sasuke's expression had grown increasingly troubled as he watched the display. This isn't training anymore, he said quietly. This is evolution. You're becoming something fundamentally different from what you were. Maybe, Naruto acknowledged, but I'm still me. I still care about protecting the village, about maintaining the bonds I've formed with all of you. Are you sure about that? Sakura asked, her medical training prompting her to look for psychological changes alongside the obvious physical ones. Because the way you're talking, the way you're presenting this, it's like you're describing a scientific experiment rather than personal growth. The observation struck deeper than Naruto cared to admit. As his power had grown, he had indeed begun to view his development more analytically, less emotionally. The passionate, impulsive boy who had once declared his intention to become Hokage seemed increasingly distant, replaced by someone who approached problems with cold, strategic calculation. The isolation has been necessary, he said, though he could hear the defensiveness in his own voice. When I'm around others, my chakra interferes with their abilities, until I learn to control that effect. You're making excuses, Sasuke interrupted, his Sharingan spinning with agitation. I know what it's like to become obsessed with power, to let the pursuit of strength cut you off from everything else. You're walking the same path I did, and it leads nowhere good. The accusation hung in the air between them, and Naruto felt a flash of his old anger, the first genuine emotion he'd experienced in weeks. But even as the anger rose, he analyzed it clinically, noting how it affected his chakra flows and considering the most efficient ways to channel it. The realization that he was studying his own emotions rather than simply feeling them was more disturbing than any external threat he'd faced. Perhaps, Kakashi said carefully, it's time to return to the village. Lady Tsunade has been working on specialized training facilities that could contain your enhanced abilities. You don't have to isolate yourself to grow stronger. Naruto considered this proposal, extending his senses toward Konoha to evaluate the village's current status. He could perceive the chakra signatures of thousands of residents, the patrol patterns of security forces, even the subtle energy fluctuations that marked ongoing construction projects. And in that moment of expanded awareness, he sensed something troubling, a convergence of hostile chakra signatures approaching the village from multiple directions. The Akatsuki were moving, and their target was clearly Konoha itself. We need to go, Naruto said, his analytical mind immediately beginning to formulate defensive strategies. The village is about to be attacked, and they're going to need all the help they can get. His teammates prepared to move, but Naruto was already ahead of them. With a gesture that seemed almost casual, he opened what appeared to be a spatial rift in the air before them, a sealing technique that created a direct pathway back to Konoha. Hiratian variant, he explained, stepping through the portal. I've been working on transportation techniques that don't require prepared seals. As they emerged into the outskirts of the village, Sasuke grabbed Naruto's arm. Promise me something, he said urgently. When we face whatever's coming, promise me you'll remember why you want to protect this place. Don't let your new abilities make you forget what it means to be human. Naruto paused, looking back at his longtime friend and rival. For a moment, his expression softened, showing glimpses of the person he'd once been. I promise, he said, but I can't promise I'll still be the same person when this is over. The words carried a weight that none of them fully understood at the time, but as they raced toward a village to face an unprecedented threat, each member of Team 7 wondered whether the power that might save them all would ultimately destroy the friend they'd fought so hard to protect. The Fourth Great Ninja War had reached its climax, and the battlefield stretched endlessly across the scarred landscape of the Land of Lightning. Allied forces clashed with white Zetsu clones, while the massive forms of reanimated legends wreaked havoc across multiple fronts. In the center of it all, the Ten Tails thrashed with primal fury, its attacks threatening to reshape the geography itself. But for the first time since awakening his true heritage, Naruto Uzumaki felt completely at peace. Standing atop a rocky outcropping that overlooked the central battlefield, he surveyed the chaos below with eyes that now perceived patterns invisible to normal sight. Each clash of chakra created ripples through the interconnected web of energy that bound all living things. Every technique left traces that could be read like a tactical manual. The entire war became an equation that his enhanced consciousness could solve. The situation is more manageable than it appears, he said to himself, his voice carrying an authority that would have surprised anyone who remembered the hyperactive genin from years past. The enemy's strategy relies on overwhelming force and emotional manipulation. Neither approach will be effective against coordinated sealing techniques. Beside him, Kurama's chakra flowed in perfect harmony with his own. The Nine Tails had undergone his own transformation during Naruto's months of training, their bond evolving into something that transcended traditional Jinchuriki relationships. They were no longer host and tenant. They had become a unified entity that combined the best aspects of both human ingenuity and tailed beast power. The other Jinchuriki are struggling, Kurama observed through their mental link. Shall we assist them first, or focus on the primary threat? Both, Naruto replied, raising his hands to begin a technique that would have been impossible before his awakening. Sage Art, Uzumaki Chain Network. Golden light erupted from his position as dozens of Adamantine Chains materialized and shot across the battlefield. But these weren't the simple binding construct his mother had once wielded. These were information-gathering networks, each chain capable of analyzing chakra signatures, reading combat patterns, and coordinating with others to create a battlefield-wide intelligence system. The chains spread across the war zone like synapses in a vast neural network, touching every major conflict and feeding tactical data back to Naruto's enhanced consciousness. Within seconds, he had a complete strategic overview of the entire war. Fascinating, he murmured, processing information from hundreds of sources simultaneously. Madara's strategy assumes that superior individual power will overcome coordinated resistance. He's correct in most circumstances, but he hasn't accounted for battlefield-level sealing techniques. One of his chains had reached Killer Bee, who was struggling against multiple reanimated shinobi while trying to protect a group of allied forces. The chain didn't attack. Instead, it analyzed the Eight Tails chakra signature and began providing tactical support. What the hell? Bee exclaimed as a golden construct wrapped around his opponent, not binding them but creating a feedback loop that disrupted their reanimation technique. This ain't no ordinary sealing jutsu, yo. Similar scenes played out across the battlefield as Naruto's chains reached other key conflicts. Each chain adapted to the specific needs of the situation. Some provided binding support, others disrupted enemy techniques, and still others created temporary barriers or escape routes for overwhelmed allies. But it was when his chains reached the other Jinchuriki that Naruto's true capabilities became apparent. Gaara, fighting desperately to protect the allied command post, suddenly felt his sand techniques become dramatically more effective as one of Naruto's chains connected with his chakra system. The chain wasn't controlling him. It was harmonizing with Shikaka's energy, creating resonance patterns that amplified both their abilities. Naruto, Gaara whispered, sensing the familiar presence even across the vast battlefield. I'm here. Naruto's voice echoed to the chain connection. All of you, I can enhance your abilities temporarily. Let me show you what's possible when Jinchuriki work together. The revelation sent shockwaves through both allied and enemy forces as the tide of battle began to shift dramatically. Each Jinchuriki found their abilities amplified beyond anything they'd previously experienced, their tailed beast chakra harmonizing with Naruto's network in ways that created entirely new tactical possibilities. Yujito's fire techniques became searing torrents that could cut through even the Ten Tails' defenses. Han's boiling chakra created steam clouds that disrupted the enemy's sensory abilities across entire sectors of the battlefield. Rashi's lava technique shaped the terrain itself, creating advantages for allied forces while denying strategic positions to the enemy. From his position overlooking the chaos, Naruto coordinated these enhanced abilities with the precision of a master strategist, his consciousness distributed across the chain network to provide real-time tactical support to dozens of separate conflicts simultaneously. Impossible, Madara breathed, his eternal Mangekyo Sharingan struggling to track the complex patterns of chakra flowing across the battlefield. No single individual should be able to coordinate operations on this scale. But Obito, watching from his position near the Ten Tails, understood what they were witnessing. He's not acting as an individual anymore, he said grimly. Somehow, the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki has created a hive mind network. He's turned the entire allied forces into extensions of his own tactical consciousness. The observation was more accurate than either enemy realized. Through his chain network, Naruto wasn't just coordinating the battle. He was experiencing it from hundreds of different perspectives simultaneously. Every ally connected to his system became another set of eyes, another source of tactical input, another node in a distributed intelligence system that could process battlefield information faster than any individual mind. When the Ten Tails launched a massive tailed beast ball toward a concentration of allied forces, Naruto didn't just see the attack from his own vantage point. He perceived it through the eyes of dozens of different observers, calculating its trajectory, power level, and optimal interception point with mathematical precision. Sage art. Uzumaki sealing barrier, he called out, his hands weaving seals with inhuman speed. A golden dome materialized around the targeted area. But instead of simply blocking the attack, it absorbed and redirected the energy back at the Ten Tails itself. The massive creature stumbled as its own power struck it with unexpected force. And for the first time since its revival, it looked genuinely surprised. How? Madara demanded, his Rinnegan analyzing the sealing technique with growing alarm. That barrier didn't just deflect the attack. It converted hostile chakra into compatible energy. That level of real-time chakra manipulation should be impossible. Not impossible, Naruto replied, his voice somehow carrying across the battlefield to reach his enemies directly. Just incredibly difficult. The Uzumaki Clan spent centuries developing techniques for exactly this purpose, turning an enemy's strength into their weakness. To demonstrate, he activated another technique that sent ripples of shock through both sides of the conflict. Forbidden art chakra inversion field. A wave of silver energy expanded outward from Naruto's position, and everywhere it touched, the nature of chakra itself began to change. The reanimated shinobi found their techniques becoming unstable as the energy binding them to life was disrupted. White Zetsu clones simply dissolved as their artificial life force was neutralized. Even the Ten Tails seemed affected, its movements becoming sluggish as the field interfered with its chakra circulation. But allied forces found themselves energized, their chakra reserves replenished, and their techniques enhanced by the same field that was weakening their enemies. Selective inversion. Naruto explained to the stunned battlefield. By reading and analyzing each individual's chakra signature, I can create fields that enhance allies while simultaneously weakening enemies. It's all about understanding the fundamental patterns that govern chakra flow. Sasuke, fighting alongside a group of reanimated Kage, felt the enhancement wash over him and recognized the profound implications immediately. Through his eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, he could see that Naruto wasn't just using advanced techniques. He was rewriting the basic rules of how chakra functioned in the immediate area. This is what you were working toward, Sasuke said, his voice carrying a mixture of admiration and concern. You haven't just mastered your inherited abilities. You've transcended them. Transcendence was never the goal, Naruto replied to their old telepathic link. Understanding was. The Uzumaki clan's true power wasn't in binding or sealing. It was in comprehension. They could see the patterns that connected all chakra, all life, all existence itself. As if to illustrate his point, Naruto's awareness suddenly expanded to encompass not just the current battlefield, but the entire ninja world. Through his enhanced perception, He could sense every major conflict, every concentration of chakra, every life force struggling against the chaos of war. And in that moment of ultimate awareness, he saw the solution to everything. The war doesn't have to continue, he said, his voice reaching every participant through the chain network. I can see the pattern that connects all conflict, all hatred, all the cycles of violence that have defined our world for generations. With the right application of sealing techniques, I could end it all. The offer hung in the air like a promise and a threat combined. Allied forces looked toward Naruto's position with hope, while enemy commanders felt a chill of genuine fear. The power being described wasn't just battlefield dominance. It was the ability to reshape civilization itself. "You're talking about forced peace," Madara observed, his voice carrying across the battlefield through his own chakra manipulation, compelling humanity to abandon conflict through sealing techniques that override free will. "I'm talking about giving humanity a choice," Naruto corrected. "But first, I need to demonstrate what's possible when the cycles of hatred are broken." With that declaration, he began the most ambitious sealing technique ever attempted, one that would either save the ninja world or fundamentally alter what it meant to be human. The revelation of Naruto's battlefield-spanning abilities had fundamentally shifted the dynamics of the Fourth Great Ninja War, but it was his next demonstration that truly shook both allies and enemies to their core. As the fighting intensified around the Ten Tails, Naruto raised his hands and performed what appeared to be a simple technique, the multi-shadow clone Jutsu that had been his signature move since childhood. But what emerged was unlike anything the ninja world had ever witnessed. Thousands upon thousands of shadow clones materialized across the battlefield, but these weren't the temporary constructs that typically vanished after a single solid hit. Each clone pulsed with its own stable chakra signature, and most remarkably, every single one bore different sealing formulas written across their clothing and skin in flowing golden script. "Impossible," Orochimaru breathed, his scientific mind struggling to comprehend what he was observing. Each clone appears to be specialized for a different type of sealing technique. The chakra requirements for maintaining such diversity should be astronomical. The reanimated Sannin was more correct than he realized. Naruto hadn't simply created an army of duplicates. He had created a living library of sealing knowledge, with each clone representing a different aspect of Uzumaki Clan techniques. Some were marked with binding formulas, others with barrier constructions, still others with space-time manipulation patterns that seemed to bend reality around them. "Sealing core formation, Uzumaki Grand Array," Naruto announced, his voice echoing from every clone simultaneously. The army of duplicates spread across the battlefield with perfect coordination, each one moving to a specific position in what appeared to be the largest sealing formation ever attempted. Gaara, still connected to Naruto's chain network, watched in fascination as clones took positions around his sand techniques. "What are you planning?" he asked through their shared connection. Something that should have been attempted generations ago. Naruto replied from his central position, the Uzumaki Clan's ultimate technique, a sealing array that encompasses an entire battlefield and converts every participant's chakra into a unified tactical system. The clones began activating their individual sealing formulas, and immediately the nature of the war began to change. Enemy attacks that should have devastated Allied positions were instead absorbed and redirected through the growing network of seals. The chaotic energy of the Ten Tails found itself channeled into geometric patterns that transformed destruction into healing energy for wounded allies. Most remarkably, the clones themselves began to evolve as they maintained their sealing techniques. Those focused on barrier arts developed enhanced defensive capabilities, their bodies becoming translucent as they merged with their own chakra constructs. Clones specializing in space-time seals seemed to flicker in and out of existence, moving through dimensional rifts as easily as walking across solid ground. "They're learning independently," Sakura observed, her medical training allowing her to analyze the chakra changes occurring in each clone. Every single one is developing along different evolutionary paths while maintaining connection to the original consciousness. Kakashi, watching from his position coordinating Allied forces, recognized the profound implications immediately. He's not just using shadow clones to multiply his presence on the battlefield. He's using them to become multiple different people simultaneously. Each clone is developing unique expertise while sharing knowledge with all the others. The tactical advantages were overwhelming. When enemy forces attempted to concentrate their attacks on specific positions, they found themselves facing clones specifically designed to counter their techniques. Fire-style users encountered clones marked with water-based sealing formulas. Lightning techniques were absorbed by clones bearing earth element seals that converted electrical energy into defensive barriers. But the true genius of Naruto's approach became apparent when his clones began working in coordinated groups. Teams of 3 or 4 would surround individual enemies, each clone contributing a different aspect to a composite sealing technique that was far more sophisticated than anything a single person could perform. Multi-layer suppression seal called out a group of clones surrounding one of the reanimated legendary shinobi. The first clone created a binding array that immobilized their target. The second established a chakra suppression field that prevented the use of techniques. The third generated a sensory deprivation barrier that cut off external awareness. The fourth, and most remarkably, began analyzing the reanimation technique itself, preparing to sever the connection between the revived soul and its artificial body. Incredible tactical coordination. Shikamaru observed from his position at the Allied Command Center. Each clone group is functioning as a specialized unit, but they're all connected to a central strategic intelligence. It's like watching a single mind operate hundreds of bodies simultaneously. The observation was accurate in ways that even the genius strategist couldn't fully appreciate. Through his enhanced consciousness, Naruto was indeed experiencing the battle from hundreds of perspectives simultaneously. Every clone's sensory input, every tactical insight, every successful technique, all of it flowed back to his original consciousness, where it was processed, analyzed, and redistributed to optimize the performance of the entire network. When a group of white Zetsu attempted a coordinated assault on a medical station, Naruto's response was immediate and overwhelming. Dozens of clones converged on the area. But instead of engaging in direct combat, they began weaving an intricate sealing array that transformed the very ground beneath the attackers. Forbidden art! Terrain conversion seal. The clones announced in unison. The earth beneath the white Zetsu began to shift and flow like liquid, but this wasn't a simple earth-style jutsu. The sealing formulas were rewriting the fundamental properties of matter itself, converting solid ground into a chakra-absorbing medium that drained the artificial beings of their life force. This goes beyond traditional sealing techniques, Tenten whispered, her expertise with ninja tools allowing her to recognize the complexity of what she was witnessing. He's not just binding or redirecting chakra. He's changing the basic rules of how chakra interacts with physical matter. The implication sent shockwaves through both sides of the conflict. If Naruto could alter the fundamental properties of matter through sealing techniques, then traditional concepts of defense, terrain advantage, and even physical law itself became variable factors rather than constants. Madara, observing from his position near the Ten Tails, felt a chill of genuine concern for the first time since his revival. The Uzumaki brat has achieved something that not even the Sage of Six Paths attempted, he said grimly. He's using sealing jutsu to rewrite reality at the quantum level. Should we target him directly? Obito suggested. But even as he spoke, both men could see the futility of the suggestion. Naruto's clone network had created overlapping defensive barriers that covered the entire battlefield. Any attack directed at the original would have to penetrate layers of sealing constructs, each designed to counter specific types of assault. Look closer, Madara said, his Rinnegan analyzing the flow of chakra through the clone network. He's not just defending himself. He's using the clones as a distributed processing system. Even if we could eliminate the original, the knowledge and techniques are stored across the entire network. Some of those clones have become sophisticated enough to function independently. This observation proved prophetic when several of Naruto's most advanced clones began demonstrating abilities that surprised even their creator. A clone focused on space-time seals suddenly opened a portal that connected directly to Mount Mayaboku, allowing Sage Toads to enter the battle as reinforcements. Another clone, specializing in life force manipulation, began healing wounded allies by converting ambient chakra into regenerative energy. Most remarkably, a clone dedicated to studying the reanimation technique achieved something unprecedented. It successfully modified the jutsu to bring back several deceased allied shinobi as temporary reinforcements, their revival powered by the same chakra network that was sustaining the clone army. "You're rewriting the fundamental rules of life and death," Tsunade observed, her medical expertise allowing her to recognize the profound implications of what the clone had achieved. "This goes beyond anything I thought possible." "It shouldn't be possible," Naruto admitted to the clone network, his voice carrying a note of wonder at his own capabilities. But the Uzumaki bloodline wasn't just about sealing hostile forces. It was about understanding the patterns that govern all existence. Life, death, matter, energy, space, time. They're all connected by underlying mathematical relationships that can be manipulated through sufficiently sophisticated sealing techniques. As if to demonstrate this principle, Naruto's clones began their most ambitious project yet, a sealing array designed to affect the Ten Tails itself. Hundreds of clones took positions around the massive creature, each one contributing to a formation so complex that its geometric patterns seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. Grand Sealing Formation, Tail Beast Pacification Array. They announced in unison. Golden light erupted from every clone simultaneously as they began the most sophisticated sealing technique ever attempted. But instead of trying to bind or suppress the Ten Tails, the formation did something far more profound. It began to separate the creature's component parts, unweaving the artificial fusion that had created the ultimate tail beast and allowing the individual consciousness of each original beast to reassert itself. Impossible! Madara roared as he felt his control over the Ten Tails beginning to slip. That seal shouldn't be able to affect a creature of this magnitude. "Magnitude isn't the issue," Naruto replied, his consciousness distributed across every clone in the formation. "The Ten Tails is powerful, but it's also fundamentally unstable, an artificial construction that violates the natural balance of chakra. The sealing array isn't overpowering it. It's simply allowing natural forces to reassert themselves." The truth of this statement became apparent as the Ten Tails began to convulse, its massive form flickering between different states as the individual tail beasts within struggled to separate themselves from the artificial unity that bound them. For the first time since the war began, victory seemed not just possible but inevitable. Naruto's clone network had transformed the chaotic battle into a controlled process of systematic enemy neutralization, while his sealing techniques were addressing threats at their fundamental level rather than simply responding to their symptoms. But even as allied forces began to celebrate, Naruto himself felt a growing sense of unease. The power he was wielding, the fundamental alterations he was making to reality itself, these went beyond anything that should be possible for a single individual. In his enhanced awareness, he could perceive the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. He had become not just a powerful shinobi, but a force of nature capable of reshaping the world according to his will. The question was no longer whether he could save everyone. It was whether anyone should possess such absolute power, regardless of their intentions. The transformation of the Fourth Great Ninja War had reached a crescendo that defied all previous understanding of military strategy. From his position overlooking the battlefield, no longer a single location but a distributed consciousness spanning hundreds of clones, Naruto processed tactical information with a clarity that bordered on prophetic insight. Every movement of enemy forces, every chakra fluctuation, every micro-expression on the faces of commanders became data points in an equation so complex that would have overwhelmed any normal mind. But Naruto's consciousness had evolved beyond normal limitations. His awareness, enhanced by the accumulated wisdom of generations of Uzumaki ancestors, and amplified through his perfected clone network. The enemy's next 17 strategic moves are predictable, he announced through the shared consciousness that connected all his clones. Madara will attempt to regain control of the Ten Tails through forced chakra resonance in approximately 43 seconds. Obito will try to create a diversion by targeting the medical stations in 31 seconds. The remaining reanimated forces will converge on coordinates 7G in 58 seconds. Allied commanders across the battlefield received these predictions through Naruto's chain network, and each one proved accurate to the second. It was as if the young Uzumaki had developed the ability to read the future itself, though the reality was even more remarkable. He was reading the present so thoroughly that the future became inevitable mathematical progression. "This level of battlefield analysis is impossible," Shikamaru whispered, his own strategic mind struggling to comprehend the scope of what he was witnessing. "He's not just predicting enemy moves. He's calculating the probability matrices for every possible action and counteraction simultaneously. From the Allied Command Center, the Reikage watch formations as forces move in perfect coordination, responding to threats before they fully materialized. How is he doing this? He demanded. Pattern recognition on a cosmic scale. And Noichi replied, his mind-reading abilities allowing him to touch the edges of Naruto's consciousness through the chain network. He's perceiving connections between events that span continents and decades. Every decision anyone has ever made, every technique they've learned, every emotional scar they carry, it's all data that informs his tactical calculations. This insight was more accurate than the Yamanaka clan had realized. Through his awakened Uzumaki abilities, Naruto had gained access to what could only be described as the Akashic record of ninja history, a vast repository of information that connected every significant event, every major technique, every influential personality that had shaped the world's development. When he looked at Madara, he didn't just see a powerful enemy. He perceived the entire chain of historical events that had led to this moment. The Uchiha's childhood trauma, his partnerships and betrayals, the philosophical evolution that had driven him toward the Eye of the Moon plan, all of it was visible as interconnected data that allowed perfect prediction of his tactical choices. Fascinating, Naruto mused as he observed Madara's approach to the destabilizing Ten Tails. He would attempt the Six Paths Chakra override in 3, 2, 1 now. Exactly as predicted, Madara began weaving hand signs for a technique designed to forcibly reintegrate the separating tail beasts. But Naruto's clones were already in position, their counter-sealing array activating the instant Madara began his jutsu. Preemptive counter-seal, chakra flow disruption, hundreds of clones caught out in perfect unison. Golden barriers materialized around Madara's technique, not blocking it, but redirecting its energy flow through geometric patterns that transformed a binding jutsu into a separation technique. The Ten Tails convulsed more violently as its artificial unity was not just disrupted, but actively dissolved by its creator's own chakra. For the first time in the war, Madara looked genuinely surprised. "You anticipated my technique perfectly," he said, his Rinnegan analyzing the sealing array with growing alarm. "But that should be impossible. I devised this particular jutsu only moments ago." "Time is more fluid than most people realize," Naruto replied, his voice emanating from every clone on the battlefield simultaneously. "When you can perceive the patterns that connect all chakra, all thought, all existence itself, the distinction between past, present, and future becomes largely arbitrary. Your technique was inevitable from the moment you chose to attempt reintegration. I simply read the probability cascade and prepared accordingly." This explanation sent chills through both allied and enemy forces. If Naruto had indeed achieved some form of temporal perception, then conventional strategy became meaningless. How do you fight someone who can see your moves before you make them? Sasuke, coordinating with a group of reanimated Kage, felt a mixture of admiration and concern as he watched his oldest friend operate on levels that seemed to transcend human capability. Through their old mental link, he reached out to touch Naruto's consciousness directly. "This isn't just strategic thinking anymore," Sasuke observed. "You're operating like a living computer that can process infinite variables simultaneously." "Not infinite," Naruto corrected through their connection, "but close enough to make the distinction academic. The Uzumaki bloodline wasn't just about raw power or advanced techniques. It was about comprehension, the ability to see the underlying order that connects all chaos." To demonstrate this principle, Naruto began orchestrating what could only be described as a symphony of warfare. Clone groups across the battlefield began moving in patterns that seemed random at first, but gradually revealed themselves to be part of an intricate design. Each group's actions created opportunities that other groups exploited, which in turn created advantages that distant units could capitalize on. Symphonic battle formation, harmonic victory protocol, Naruto announced, and suddenly the Allied forces found themselves moving in perfect coordination despite having no direct communication with each other. A medical team treating wounded soldiers in the eastern sector suddenly found their position reinforced by Earth-style barriers that had been created by clones in the northern sector 30 seconds earlier. Lightning-style attacks on the western front were redirected through sealing arrays to power defensive techniques being used in the south. Individual skirmishes became interconnected components of a larger strategic machine that operated with clockwork precision. He's turned the entire war into a single, unified technique, Tsunade observed. Her strategic experience allowed her to recognize the unprecedented nature of what she was witnessing. Every person, every technique, every piece of terrain, they're all components in a battlefield-spanning jutsu that he's orchestrating in real time. The psychological impact on enemy forces was immediate and devastating. How do you maintain morale when facing an opponent who has seemingly achieved omniscience? Every attack was perfectly countered, every strategy anticipated, and neutralized before it could be implemented. But it was Naruto's handling of the ten-tail separation that truly demonstrated the scope of his evolved capabilities. As the individual tailed beasts began to emerge from the artificial fusion, each one was met by specialized clone teams that had been designed specifically to handle their unique chakra signatures. One tail extraction protocol, sand resonance formation, called out a group of clones as Chakra began to separate from the collective. Their sealing techniques harmonized with the one-tail sand-based chakra, creating a stabilizing field that allowed the separation to occur without traumatic shock to either the beast or its surroundings. Similar protocols activated for each tailed beast as they emerged. The two tails found itself surrounded by clones using flame-based sealing techniques that resonated with its fire nature. The three tails was met with water element seals that created a familiar aquatic environment. Each beast was not just extracted but welcomed, their individual natures acknowledged and respected rather than simply controlled. Impossible! Obito whispered as he watched his ultimate weapon being systematically dismantled. The 10 tails represents perfect unity, the fusion of all tail beast chakra into a single unbeatable force. How is he unweaving something that was designed to be permanent? Because he understands what you never did. Came a voice from behind him. Obito spun to find one of Naruto's most advanced clones standing just meters away, having somehow bypassed every sensory technique and defensive measure the masked ninja had deployed. Force unity is inherently unstable, the clone continued, its eyes holding depths of wisdom that seemed incongruous with its youthful appearance. The 10 tails was never truly unified. It was a collection of individual consciousness forcibly merged through artificial means. All I'm doing is allowing their natural state to reassert itself. Obito launched a desperate attack, but the clone was already moving, its form flickering through dimensional rifts as it deployed space-time seals with casual expertise. Within seconds, Obito found himself trapped in a sealing array that didn't just bind his body, but prevented access to his Kamui ability entirely. Sealing formula, dimensional anchor, the clone explained almost conversationally. By analyzing your chakra signature and the specific frequency of your space-time techniques, I've created a localized field that prevents dimensional manipulation. You're effectively locked into this reality until I choose to release you. Similar scenes played out across the battlefield as Naruto's strategic genius reached its ultimate expression. Every major enemy had been countered not through brute force, but through perfect understanding of their abilities and psychology. The war was being won through comprehension rather than destruction. But even as victory became inevitable, Naruto found himself grappling with profound philosophical questions. The power to predict and control events on this scale, was it still strategic thinking, or had he become something more akin to a god manipulating the affairs of mortals? The war is effectively over, he announced to the clone network, his voice reaching every participant simultaneously. But ending the conflict is only the beginning. The real question is what kind of world we build from the ashes of this chaos. As if summoned by his words, the separated tailed beast began to converge on his position, not as threats or weapons, but as individuals seeking to understand a being who had freed them from forced unity. For the first time in their existence, they had encountered a human who seemed to comprehend their true nature rather than simply their power. And in that moment, as 9 massive creatures bowed their heads in respect to a young man who had transcended every limitation of his birth, the ninja world realized that everything was about to change in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Deep within the mental landscape that served as the meeting ground between Naruto and the Nine Tails, profound changes were taking place that reflected the external transformation of their shared power. The cage that had once confined Kurama had long since dissolved, replaced by an environment that seemed to shift and flow like liquid light, a space where human consciousness and tailed beast awareness merge into something entirely new. Kurama's massive form had undergone its own evolution, his traditional fox appearance now overlaid with geometric patterns that matched the sealing formulas flowing through Naruto's enhanced chakra system. The ancient hatred and rage that had once defined the Nine Tails had been transformed into something far more complex. A fierce protective instinct combined with intellectual curiosity about the cosmic forces they were now able to perceive. "The synchronization is complete," Kurama observed, his mental voice carrying harmonics that resonated with Naruto's own thoughts. "We are no longer separate entities, sharing a vessel. We have become a single consciousness operating through multiple perspective matrices." The terminology itself reflected how profoundly both of them had changed. Where once Kurama had spoken in simple terms of power and dominance, he now discussed concepts that would have challenged the greatest philosophers and theoretical scientists of the ninja world. "I can feel it," Naruto replied, his consciousness expanding to encompass not just their shared mental space, but the external battlefield where his clone network was systematically dismantling enemy resistance. "When I use the Adamantine Chains now, they're not just my technique or your chakra. They're something that neither of us could have achieved alone." To demonstrate, Naruto activated his signature sealing technique, but what emerged was unlike anything he had previously manifested. Golden chains erupted from his position on the battlefield, but these constructs seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions, their forms flickering between solid matter and pure energy as they adapted to whatever role the situation demanded. When the chains encountered the newly separated Two Tails, they didn't attempt to bind or control the creature. Instead, they resonated with Matatabi's chakra signature, creating a harmonic frequency that communicated directly with the cat-like beast's consciousness. "Greetings, sister." Kurama's voice spoke through the chains, addressing the Two Tails with respect that would have been impossible before his fusion with Naruto's enhanced awareness. "The small one has freed you from artificial unity. Will you join us in creating something better?" Matatabi's response came through the same harmonic frequency, her consciousness touching the expanded awareness that Naruto and Kurama shared. "The kid has changed," she observed, her mental voice carrying undertones of wonder. "His chakra carries echoes of the Sage of Six Paths, but refined through understanding that even the Ancient One did not possess." This observation was more profound than any of the combatants realized. Through his awakened Uzumaki heritage and his evolved bond with Kurama, Naruto had achieved something that transcended the original distribution of tail beast power. He wasn't just a perfect Jinchuriki. He had become a bridge between human and tailed beast consciousness that allowed both species to evolve beyond their original limitations. "The chains aren't just sealing techniques anymore," Naruto explained to the assembled tailed beasts as his constructs spread throughout the battlefield. "They're communication networks, consciousness bridges that allow perfect understanding between different forms of life." As if to prove his point, the Adamantine Chains began connecting with the other separated tailed beasts, creating a network of shared awareness that linked all 9 creatures for the first time since their original unity within the 10 Tails. But this wasn't a forced merger that had created the ultimate monster. It was a voluntary communion that preserved each beast's individual identity while allowing access to collective knowledge and power. Incredible. Shikaku's voice echoed to the network as the One Tail experienced true communication with his siblings for the first time in centuries. "I can feel all of your experiences, your perspectives, your understanding of the world, but I remain myself." This is what the old man intended when he first divided the 10 Tails' power. Gyuki, the 8 Tails, added his own perspective to the growing chorus of tailed beast consciousness. "More than the old man intended," he corrected. "The Sage of Six Paths could separate us, but he could never have imagined this level of harmonious integration. The kid has achieved something unprecedented. Unity without loss of identity." From the battlefield, combatants on both sides watched in awe as the 9-tailed beasts began to demonstrate coordinated abilities that had never been possible during their individual existences. Techniques that drew upon multiple types of chakra simultaneously. Combination attacks that seemed to bend the laws of physics. Defensive formations that created barriers not just around physical space, but around concepts themselves. But it was the effect on Naruto himself that truly demonstrated the scope of what had been achieved. With his consciousness linked to all nine-tailed beasts through the Adamantine Chain network, his awareness expanded to encompass perspectives that no human had ever experienced. He could perceive chakra flows across continental distances, sense the emotional states of individuals on the other side of the world, and comprehend patterns of cause and effect that span generations. This is why the Uzumaki Clan was destroyed, he said, his voice carrying to the chain network to reach every participant in the war simultaneously. Not because of our sealing abilities or our chakra reserves, but because we represented the potential for a fundamental evolution in what it means to be alive. The statement sent chills through both allied and enemy forces. If Naruto's transformation represented just the beginning of what was possible, then every assumption about power, identity, and the nature of existence itself would need to be reconsidered. Madara, still struggling against the sealing arrays that prevented him from regaining control of the Ten Tails, felt a profound sense of unease as he observed the tailed beast unity that Naruto had achieved. "This goes beyond anything in my plans," he admitted to Obito through their shared connection. "The brat isn't just powerful, he's become a catalyst for species-level evolution. Should we retreat?" Obito suggested, though even as he spoke, both men could see that retreat was no longer a viable option. Naruto's chain network had spread across the entire battlefield, creating a web of connected consciousness that would make escape impossible for anyone who posed a continued threat. "Retreat is irrelevant," Madara replied grimly. "The real question is whether what he's becoming will ultimately serve or replace humanity itself." This concern was echoed by some of Naruto's own allies, watching him coordinate not just human forces but the fundamental forces of nature itself. Kakashi found himself wondering whether his student was still the hyperactive boy he'd once trained, or if that personality had been absorbed into something vastly more complex. But it was Sasuke who voiced a question that troubled them all. Through his mental link with Naruto, he reached out to touch his friend's expanded consciousness directly. "Are you still human?" Sasuke asked simply. The question hung in the shared mental space between them, and for a long moment, Naruto didn't respond. When he finally did, his answer carried the weight of profound transformation. "I don't know," Naruto admitted. "I still care about the same people, still want to protect the same things, still believe in the same values. But the way I experience reality, the scope of what I can perceive and accomplish, I'm not sure the categories of human and non-human are relevant anymore." Through the chain network, every participant in the war felt the honest uncertainty in Naruto's response. Here was someone wielding godlike power who was still questioning his own nature, still grappling with the implications of what he'd become. "Perhaps the question isn't whether I'm still human," Naruto continued, "but whether humanity itself is ready to evolve. The tailed beast and I have achieved something new, a form of existence that transcends the limitations of individual consciousness while preserving individual identity. Maybe this is what the future looks like for everyone." As if summoned by his words, the chain network began to pulse with new energy, and every human connected to it felt their own awareness expanding. Not forcibly, not invasively, but offered as a choice, the opportunity to experience reality through expanded consciousness while maintaining their essential selves. Some accepted the offer, their minds touching the vast web of interconnected awareness that linked all nine-tailed beasts and their evolved Jinchuriki. Others declined, choosing to remain within familiar limitations. But all understood that they had witnessed the dawn of a new age, one where the boundaries between different forms of consciousness were no longer absolute barriers. The war was ending not through conquest, but through transformation, and the world would never be the same. The moment of transcendent unity shattered like glass when Pain's final gambit activated across the battlefield. Hidden beneath the chaos of war, the former leader of Akatsuki had prepared one last technique. Not to achieve victory, but to force Naruto into a state where his evolved powers would become uncontrollable. Shinra Tensei, emotional resonance field. Pain announced from a concealed position, his Rinnegan blazing with malevolent energy. The technique wasn't designed to cause physical damage, but to amplify negative emotions to unbearable levels, forcing even the most controlled individuals to lose themselves to rage, despair, and hatred. The effect on the tailed beast network was immediate and catastrophic. 9 ancient creatures, each carrying centuries of accumulated trauma, suddenly found their suppressed emotions amplified beyond any ability to contain them. The careful balance of consciousness that Naruto had achieved through his chain network began to collapse as overwhelming fury flooded through every connection. The hatred, we can't. Kurama's mental voice fragmented as the Nine Tails felt not just his own rage, but the accumulated anger of all his siblings, amplified through their shared connection until it became a tidal wave of pure destruction. Naruto, standing at the center of this emotional maelstrom, felt his carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. The power that flowed through him with such perfect control suddenly felt wild, chaotic, demanding release through violence rather than strategy. "No," he whispered, his hands clenching into fists as golden chakra began to leak from his body in violent pulses. I can't let this." But the emotional amplification was too intense, touching not just his current feelings, but reaching back through his inherited memories to awaken the rage of generations of Uzumaki ancestors. He felt their anger at being hunted, their fury at watching their homeland burn, their desperate need for vengeance against those who had destroyed their clan. The transformation that followed was unlike anything the ninja world had ever witnessed. Naruto's body began to change, his familiar features becoming more angular, more predatory. His whisker marks deepened into actual scars, and his eyes blazed with light that seemed to contain the concentrated fury of an entire bloodline. But most dramatically, his chakra cloak evolved beyond its previous forms, becoming something that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "Uzumaki rage state. Ancestral fury mode," he snarled, his voice carrying harmonics that spoke of power barely contained within mortal flesh. Golden chains erupted from his body, not the controlled, purposeful constructs he'd been wielding, but wild, destructive appendages that seemed to have minds of their own. They lashed out in all directions, not distinguishing between ally and enemy as they sought targets for the overwhelming rage that drove them. One chain struck a mountainside and simply erased it, the stone disappearing into dimensional rifts rather than being destroyed through conventional means. Another wrapped around a group of white Zetsu and began converting them into pure chakra, absorbing their life force to fuel the growing conflagration of power surrounding Naruto. "This is what I was afraid of," Tsunade whispered, watching from the medical command center as readings from their monitoring equipment went completely off-scale. The Uzumaki bloodline wasn't just powerful, it was volatile, when combined with tailed beast chakra and emotional amplification. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone could see the implications as Naruto's rage-fueled power began affecting the fundamental structure of reality in his immediate vicinity. Space itself seemed to warp around him, and time flowed differently in the areas where his chains touched the ground. Sasuke, still connected to Naruto through their old mental link, felt the full force of his friend's transformation through their bond. The experience was overwhelming. Not just the raw power, but the depth of anger that had been building in the Uzumaki bloodline for generations. "He's not just angry," Sasuke gasped, falling to his knees as the emotional feedback threatened to overwhelm his own consciousness. "He's carrying the rage of everyone who ever wore the Uzumaki name. Hundreds of years of accumulated fury at a world that feared and destroyed his clan." The other tailed beasts, still connected to the chain network, found themselves caught up in an emotional storm. Each one began manifesting their own rage states, their individual traumas amplified and reflected back to the shared consciousness until the entire network became a feedback loop of pure destructive intent. "The kit has lost control," Matatabi observed, her own voice distorted by the overwhelming anger flowing through her consciousness. His power is responding to emotional states he inherited rather than consciously chose. This is what the humans feared when they destroyed Uzushiogakure. Not just our individual strength, but what we become when that strength is driven by inherited trauma. Across the battlefield, combatants from both sides began to retreat as Naruto's rage-enhanced abilities created zones of reality distortion that were simply too dangerous to approach. Where his chains touched the ground, the earth itself began to change, not just physically, but conceptually, becoming something that existed according to his emotional state rather than natural law. "Ceiling formula, reality anchor," he roared, his techniques now driven by instinct rather than conscious strategy. But instead of creating the precise, controlled effects he'd been demonstrating throughout the war, his seals began rewriting the fundamental rules that govern existence in their area of effect. Gravity reversed itself in some locations, while time moved backward in others. Chakra techniques began producing effects that had nothing to do with their original purposes. Their energy redirected to the lens of Uzumaki fury into expressions of pure destructive will. "He's lost himself," Kakashi observed, his Sharingan trying to track the chaos of chakra patterns surrounding his former student. The emotional amplification has triggered something primal in the Uzumaki bloodline, not just personal rage, but genetic memory of trauma. This insight proved crucial to understanding what was happening. Naruto wasn't just experiencing his own anger, but accessing emotional imprints left by generations of his ancestors. Every Uzumaki who had died fighting to protect their homeland, every parent who had watched their children perish, every survivor who had lived with the knowledge that their entire civilization had been erased, all of their rage was flowing through him simultaneously. The tailed beasts, connected to his consciousness through the chain network, found themselves caught in this generational fury. Their own individual traumas, centuries of being hunted, captured, and used as weapons, merged with the Uzumaki emotional inheritance to create something that transcended normal concept of anger or hatred. "This is what the old man feared," Gyuki whispered to the network, his massive form trembling with the effort of maintaining any semblance of control. "Not that we would be used as weapons, but that we would eventually become weapons by choice, driven by the accumulated pain of existence itself." But even as Naruto's rage threatened to consume everything around him, somewhere deep within the storm of inherited anger, his original personality struggled to reassert itself. The boy who had promised to protect his friends, who had sworn to break the cycles of hatred that plagued the ninja world, that core identity hadn't been destroyed, merely overwhelmed. "I won't let this define me," he managed to say, his voice barely audible over the sound of reality tearing around him. "This anger is not mine alone, but what I do with it, that choice is still mine." The declaration seemed to create a moment of clarity within the chaos, and for an instant, the wild chains surrounding him paused in their destructive rampage. In that moment of stillness, Naruto reached deep into his consciousness, not to suppress the rage, but to understand it, to find the pain beneath the anger and address it directly. "My ancestors," he whispered, his awareness touching the emotional imprints that had been driving his transformation. "You were afraid for your children, for your culture, for everything you'd built. The anger was never about hatred. It was about love that had nowhere to go after everything you cared about was destroyed." This realization began to transform the nature of his rage state. The wild, destructive energy didn't disappear, but began to take on purpose, direction, meaning beyond mere destruction. The chains that had been lashing out randomly began to move with intent, and the reality distortions around him started to stabilize into patterns that served protective rather than destructive purposes. "Uzumaki resolve state. Protective fury mode," he announced, his voice carrying new harmonics that spoke of power channeled through understanding rather than unleashed through loss of control. The change was immediately apparent to everyone on the battlefield. Where before Naruto's power had been a chaotic storm of destructive force, now it became something far more focused and purposeful. The reality distortions around him stabilized into protective barriers that shielded allied forces from harm while systematically dismantling enemy positions with surgical precision. "He's channeling the rage instead of being consumed by it," Sakura observed, her medical training allowing her to track the changes in his chakra signature. The emotional amplification is still active, but he's using it as fuel for protective techniques rather than destructive ones. The transformation had profound effects on the tailed beast network as well. As Naruto's understanding of his inherited rage deepened, the other beasts found their own emotional storms beginning to calm. The shared consciousness that connected them all carried not just his anger but his resolution, his determination to transform pain into purpose. "The kid has achieved something none of us thought possible," Kurama observed, his mental voice carrying notes of wonder and respect. "He's not suppressing the rage or being controlled by it. He's integrating it into his identity while maintaining conscious choice about how to express it." This integration manifested in new abilities that combined the focused fury of the Uzumaki bloodline with the tactical precision Naruto had developed through his enhanced awareness. His chains now move with deadly purpose, each one capable of multiple simultaneous functions, binding enemies while healing allies, creating barriers while gathering intelligence, disrupting hostile techniques while reinforcing friendly ones. Multi-dimensional chain formation. Harmony through strength, Naruto announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had fully accepted both his power and the responsibility that came with it. The technique that followed was perhaps the most complex sealing array ever attempted. Golden chains erupted from his position and spread across the entire battlefield. But instead of simply binding or destroying enemies, they began to create what could only be described as zones of enforced peace. Within these zones, hostile techniques simply wouldn't function. Weapons passed through their targets without causing harm. Destructive jutsu converted themselves into healing energies. Most remarkably, the emotional amplification technique that Pain had used to trigger Naruto's rage state was itself neutralized, replaced by a field that promoted understanding and empathy between opposing forces. Impossible, Pain breathed, watching his carefully planned psychological warfare technique not just countered but completely reversed. No sealing jutsu should be able to override fundamental emotional responses. "You're thinking too small," Naruto replied, his consciousness now distributed across the entire chain network in ways that allowed him to address every participant in the conflict simultaneously. Emotions aren't separate from chakra. They're expressions of the same underlying energy patterns that govern all existence. Change the patterns, and you change the emotional reality they create. To demonstrate this principle, Naruto's chains began reaching out to touch the consciousness of combatants on both sides of conflict. But instead of forcing changes upon them, the constructs offered each individual the opportunity to experience the war from multiple perspectives simultaneously. Allied soldiers suddenly understood the desperation and idealism that had driven many of their enemies to choose conflict over diplomacy. Enemy operatives felt the genuine desire to protect home and family that motivated their opponents. The artificial divisions that had sustained the war began to collapse as participants experienced the common humanity that connected them all. This is what the Sage of Six Paths intended when he first developed ninjutsu, Naruto explained, his enhanced awareness allowing him to perceive the historical patterns that had led to the current conflict. Not techniques for warfare, but methods for fostering understanding between different forms of consciousness. The warrior applications were a corruption of the original purpose. The statement sent shockwaves through the ninja world's understanding of their own history and culture. If combat techniques were indeed corruptions of originally peaceful arts, then everything they thought they knew about the development of civilization would need to be reconsidered. But it was the effect on the remaining enemy leadership that truly demonstrated the scope of what Naruto had achieved. Madara, who had spent decades planning the destruction of the current world order, found himself experiencing the war through perspectives of everyone his actions had harmed. The abstract concept of acceptable casualties became the concrete reality of individual suffering, and his philosophical justifications for mass destruction crumbled under the weight of actual empathy. "What have I done?" Madara whispered, his eternal Mangekyo Sharingan flickering as his enhanced perception showed him the true consequences of his actions. "I told myself I was saving the world, but I was just running from the pain of loss." Similar revelations were occurring throughout the remaining enemy forces, as Naruto's empathy field allowed each individual to understand not just their opponent's perspectives, but their own motivations with unprecedented clarity. The self-deception that had sustained the conflict began to evaporate under the light of honest self-examination. "The war is ending," Tsunade observed, watching as combatants across the battlefield began laying down their weapons. Not through victory or defeat, but through understanding. But even as the immediate conflict concluded, Naruto found himself grappling with the implications of what he had accomplished. The power to force empathy upon others, to override individual emotional responses in favor of broader understanding. Was this liberation or simply a more sophisticated form of control? "I'm not making them feel anything that isn't already within them," he said, addressing the ethical concerns he could sense in the minds of his allies. "The chains don't create empathy. They simply remove the barriers that prevent people from accessing the understanding they already possess." It was a distinction that would fuel philosophical debates for generations to come. But in the immediate aftermath of the war, as former enemies worked together to heal the wounded and repair the damage caused by years of conflict, most participants felt that whatever Naruto had done, the results justified the methods. The tailed beasts, still connected to his consciousness through the chain network, added their own perspectives to the discussion. The kid has achieved something unprecedented, Shikaku observed. He has used inherited rage not to perpetuate cycles of violence, but to break them entirely. This may be the first time in history that trauma has been transformed into healing rather than passed on to the next generation. As the sun set over the transformed battlefield, Naruto stood surrounded by the evidence of what conscious choice could accomplish when combined with unlimited power. The war was over, but the real work was just beginning. The task of building a world where such conflicts would no longer be necessary. The question was whether humanity was ready for the fundamental changes that such a world would require. In the aftermath of the battlefield transformation, the most powerful figures in the ninja world found themselves confronting a reality that defied every assumption they had held about the nature of power, control, and human potential. The techniques they had spent lifetimes mastering, the strategies they had developed through decades of warfare, the fundamental worldviews that had shaped their identities, all of it had been rendered obsolete by what they had witnessed. Madara Uchiha, legendary founder of Konoha and architect of the current war, stood motionless among the dissipating energy fields that had once contained his ultimate technique, his eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, capable of perceiving the flow of chakra across vast distances, showed him patterns of energy that his mind struggled to categorize. "This goes beyond anything the sage of six paths achieved," he said quietly, his voice carrying none of its usual arrogance. "The brat hasn't just mastered individual techniques. He's rewritten the fundamental rules that govern how chakra interacts with consciousness itself. Obito, freed from the dimensional anchor that had bound him, but making no move to continue the conflict, found himself staring at Naruto with an expression that mixed terror with something approaching reverence. When I activated the Infinite Tsukumi Protocol, I thought I was imposing a perfect reality on an imperfect world. But what he's done, he's made the imperfect world perfect without taking away anyone's choice to experience it." The observation struck at the heart of what made Naruto's achievement so fundamentally disturbing to those who had built their lives around the exercise of power over others. Traditional dominance required the subjugation of opposing wills, the replacement of others' choices with your own vision of order. But Naruto had achieved compliance without coercion, unity without uniformity, peace without the elimination of individual agency. "It's not possible," Orochimaru whispered, his scientific mind racing through everything he thought he understood about human psychology and social dynamics. Conflict is inevitable when conscious beings possess different desires and goals. The only way to eliminate warfare is to eliminate the capacity for independent thought itself. But even as he spoke, the legendary Sannin could see the evidence contradicting his statement. Around them, former enemies worked together to tend the wounded, not because they had been compelled to do so, but because Naruto's empathy field had allowed them to experience the full reality of others' suffering. They chose cooperation because, having felt the consequences of conflict from all perspectives simultaneously, any other choice became impossible to justify. "He's found a third option," Kabuto observed, his own experiments with consciousness manipulation providing him with insights that others lacked. Not domination or elimination of will, but expansion of awareness to the point where selfish choices become self-evidently counterproductive. From her position coordinating the medical response, Tsunade watched the proceedings with the eye of someone who had witnessed many powerful individuals rise and fall throughout her long lifetime. But what she was seeing now transcended her previous experience entirely. "The psychological profiles don't make sense," she said to Shizune, reviewing data from their monitoring equipment. "Every individual who is touched by his empathy field shows brain activity patterns that shouldn't be possible. They're maintaining their distinct personalities while simultaneously processing experiences from multiple different perspectives." The implications were staggering. If Naruto had indeed developed the ability to enhance human consciousness without erasing individual identity, then the traditional trade-off between personal autonomy and social cooperation might no longer be relevant. People could choose to work together not because they had been forced to abandon their individual goals, but because their enhanced awareness showed them how individual fulfillment was connected to collective well-being. But it was a reaction of the tailed beasts that truly demonstrated the scope of what had been accomplished. Creatures that had spent centuries viewing humans as either captors or enemies now found themselves genuinely curious about the potential for interspecies cooperation. "The kid has shown us something we never thought to look for," Gyuki rumbled. His massive form relaxed in a way that would have been impossible before the empathy field had allowed him to experience human consciousness from the inside. We assumed that different forms of awareness were inevitably incompatible. But expansion perception can create compatibility without requiring anyone to sacrifice their essential nature. Shikaku, traditionally the most volatile and aggressive of the tailed beasts, added his own perspective to the growing discussion. For the first time, I understand why the old man divided our power rather than simply sealing it away. He wasn't creating weapons. He was setting up the possibility for this kind of transcendent cooperation. The kit has fulfilled the original vision. These observations reached the ears of human leaders who were still grappling with the strategic implications of what they had witnessed. If the tailed beasts, traditionally viewed as forces of nature too dangerous to be reasoned with, were now willingly participating in cooperative ventures, then every assumption about the relationship between power and responsibility would need to be reconsidered. "The question," said the Reikage, his usual bombastic personality muted by the magnitude of what he had experienced, "is what happens next. If one person possesses the ability to create this kind of transformation, what does that mean for the concept of democratic governance? How do you maintain checks and balances against someone who can literally change how people think about their own interests?" It was a concern that extended far beyond the ninja world's political structures. Religious leaders, philosophical schools, and academic institutions across the globe would spend years grappling with the implications of consciousness that could be enhanced without being controlled, awareness that could be expanded without being directed. But for Naruto himself, standing at the center of the transformed battlefield, the questions were more immediate and personal. The power he had demonstrated was unprecedented, but it was also isolating in ways that his previous abilities had never been. "They're afraid of me," he said quietly to Kurama through their mental link. "Not because they think I'll hurt them, but because they don't understand what I've become." How do you maintain human relationships when your capabilities transcend human categories entirely? "Perhaps," Kurama replied thoughtfully, "the question isn't how to maintain old relationships, but how to develop new forms of connection that acknowledge what you become while honoring what you've always been." This insight proved prophetic when Sasuke approached Naruto's position, moving with the careful deliberation of someone approaching a natural disaster that had temporarily taken human form. "I need to know," Sasuke said simply. "Are you still my friend, or have you become something that just remembers being my friend?" The question cut to the heart of Naruto's own uncertainties about his transformation. He had retained his memories, his values, his emotional connections to the people he cared about, but the scope of his awareness, the scale of his capabilities, the fundamental changes in how he experienced reality, were these additions to his personality or replacements of it? "I'm still me," Naruto replied, though even he could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "But I'm also more than I was. The question is whether more means different or just expanded." To demonstrate his point, Naruto allowed his enhanced awareness to touch Sasuke's consciousness directly, not imposing any changes, but simply sharing his perspective on their long friendship. Through the connection, Sasuke experienced their relationship not just from his own viewpoint, but from Naruto's as well. The genuine affection, the competitive drive, the protective instincts that had survived every transformation. "You're still you," Sasuke said after the connection faded, relief evident in his voice. "The core personality that I've been competing with all these years, that's unchanged. Everything else is just amplification." But even as his oldest friend accepted his evolved nature, Naruto could sense the broader fear and uncertainty that his demonstration had created. Leaders from every major nation were already planning emergency meetings to discuss how to respond to the existence of someone with his capabilities. Some would propose alliance and cooperation. Others would inevitably consider elimination as the only way to maintain the existing order. "The world isn't ready for what I represent," Naruto observed, his enhanced perception showing in the political and social upheaval that his actions were already beginning to trigger. "They can accept the peace I've created, but they can't accept the person who created it." The irony wasn't lost on any of the observers. Naruto had ended a war, saved countless lives, and demonstrated the possibility of transcending the cycles of violence that had plagued humanity for millennia. Yet his very success had created new forms of fear and uncertainty that might ultimately prove more destabilizing than the conflict he had resolved. As the sun set over the transformed battlefield, the ninja world found itself standing at the threshold of a new age, one where the traditional boundaries between human and divine, individual and collective, possible and impossible had been forever altered. The question was whether they would embrace the changes or destroy the person who had made them possible. Deep within the hidden archives beneath the ruins of Uzushiogakure, a discovery was made that would shake the foundations of everything the ninja world thought it understood about the nature of power itself. Naruto, drawn by resonances in his inherited memories that he couldn't ignore, had returned to his ancestral homeland in the weeks following the war's end, seeking answers to questions about his transformation that haunted his enhanced consciousness. The chamber he found defied every principle of architecture and spatial geometry he had encountered. Vast beyond anything that should have been possible to construct within the confines of the island, it seemed to exist in its own pocket dimension, accessible only to those carrying the specific chakra signatures of the Uzumaki bloodline. And at its center, suspended within a pillar of crystallized chakra, was a scroll that radiated power on scales that made even Naruto's evolved perception strain to comprehend. "The final seal," he whispered, reading inscriptions carved into the crystal that seemed to shift and change as he watched. "The ultimate technique of the Uzumaki Clan, sealed away because its use would reshape the fundamental nature of reality itself." The implications were staggering. According to the inscriptions, this technique didn't just manipulate chakra or consciousness. It could rewrite the basic laws that govern existence, altering everything from physical constants to metaphysical principles. In the wrong hands, it could literally end the universe. In the right hands, it could remake it entirely. But the most disturbing revelation came when Naruto read the conditions for its use. The final seal required not just immense chakra reserves or advanced sealing knowledge. It demanded the willing sacrifice of the user's individual existence, transforming them into a fundamental force of nature that would persist long after their human consciousness had dissolved. This is what they were really afraid of, Naruto said to himself, his enhanced awareness allowing him to perceive the historical patterns that had led to his clan's destruction. Not just our individual power, but the possibility that one of us might eventually discover this technique and use it. Through his mental link with Kurama, he shared his discovery with the Nine Tails, whose ancient perspective provided crucial context for understanding what he had found. "I remember this," Kurama said, his mental voice carrying notes of awe and terror. "The Sage of Six Paths spoke of it once, when he thought none of us were listening. He called it the God Killer, a technique that could unmake the fundamental forces that created and sustained reality itself." The revelation that even the legendary founder ninjutsu had known about this technique added new dimensions to Naruto's understanding of his inheritance. If the sage had been aware of the final seal, but had chosen not to use it even during his greatest battles, then its power must be beyond anything that could be safely wielded by any individual consciousness. But why seal away here? Naruto wondered aloud. If the technique is too dangerous to use, why preserve it all? The answer came in the form of additional inscriptions that became visible only when Naruto's chakra reached a certain resonance frequency with the crystal containment system. These writings, in a script so ancient that only his inherited memories allowed him to decipher them, revealed the true purpose of the Uzumaki Clan's ultimate technique. It wasn't meant to be used in warfare or conquest. It was designed as a last resort against existential threats that could only be countered by fundamental changes to reality itself. The technique was essentially a reset button for the universe, a way to preserve the essential nature of existence while eliminating systemic problems that had become too deeply embedded to solve through conventional means. A cosmic emergency protocol, Naruto breathed, finally understanding the full scope of his ancestors' vision. They weren't trying to create the ultimate weapon. They were trying to create the ultimate solution. But even as he grasped the noble intentions behind the technique, Naruto couldn't ignore its terrifying potential for misuse. In the hands of someone driven by personal ambition or ideological extremism, the final seal could become exactly what its creators had hoped to prevent, a tool for imposing one person's vision on all of existence. The ethical dilemmas were paralyzing. Should such power even exist? Did anyone, regardless of their intentions, have the right to make decisions that would affect the fundamental nature of reality for every living being? Could the technique be modified to preserve individual choice while still accomplishing its cosmic restructuring goals? As Naruto wrestled with these questions, his enhanced perception detected approaching chakra signatures, familiar ones that carried undertones of determination mixed with concern. His friends had tracked him to this hidden sanctuary, apparently sensing through their various connections that he had discovered something of unprecedented significance. Naruto. Sakura's voice echoed through the dimensional space as Team 7 materialized at the chamber's entrance, having somehow navigated the spatial distortions that should have made the location inaccessible to anyone but him. What have you found? Instead of answering directly, Naruto gestured toward the crystallized scroll at the chamber center. Immediately, his teammates felt the overwhelming presence of the technique it contained, a pressure that seemed to emanate not just from the physical artifact, but from the concept it represented. This is why the Uzumaki Clan was destroyed, he said quietly. Not just because of our individual abilities, but because we were the guardians of something that could end or recreate everything. Sasuke's eternal Mangekyo Sharingan activated automatically as it attempted to analyze the scroll's chakra signature, but the technique's complexity overwhelmed even his enhanced perception. I can't even comprehend what I'm seeing, he admitted. The power levels they're not just off the charts. They're operating according to principles that shouldn't exist. Kakashi, drawing upon his vast experience with dangerous Jutsu, immediately recognized the existential implications of what they were facing. This goes beyond forbidden techniques, he said grimly. This is the kind of power that shouldn't exist because its mere presence changes the nature of choice itself. But it was Sakura, with her medical training and scientific background, who asked the question that cut to the heart of their dilemma. Can you use it? The query hung in the air between them, carrying implications that none of them fully wanted to acknowledge. Naruto's evolved capabilities, his fusion with Kurama, his mastery of consciousness manipulation, all of it suggested that he might indeed be capable of wielding the final seal. But should he? I think so, Naruto replied honestly. My chakra resonates with the containment crystal, and inherited memories include fragments of the activation protocols. But using it would mean becoming something that's no longer human in any meaningful sense. The cost was clear from the inscription surrounding the scroll. The final seal required not just the user's death, but the complete dissolution of their individual consciousness into fundamental forces that govern reality. They would become a law of nature rather than a person, their will and intentions encoded into the basic structure of existence itself. There has to be another way, Sasuke said, his voice carrying the desperation of someone who had already lost too much to the pursuit of ultimate power. If you use this technique, you won't just die. You'll cease to exist as an individual consciousness. We'd lose you forever. But even as his friends struggled with the personal implications, Naruto found himself considering the broader questions that the technique raised. If reality itself was flawed, if the cycles of violence and suffering that plagued existence could only be broken through fundamental restructuring, did the preservation of his individual consciousness matter more than the welfare of all life everywhere? The technique doesn't have to be used immediately, he said, carefully not committing to any course of action. But knowing it exists, understanding what it could accomplish, I can't just pretend that knowledge away. Through his connection to the Tailed Beast network, he shared his discovery with all 9 of the great chakra entities, seeking their perspectives on power that transcended even their ancient understanding. The kid has found the ultimate expression of the sage's original vision, Gyuki observed. Not just techniques for fostering understanding between different forms of consciousness, but the ability to restructure reality itself to eliminate the conditions that create conflict in the first place. But at what cost? Matatabi added, her feminine voice carrying notes of genuine concern. If he uses this technique, we lose not just our friend, but our bridge between human and tailed beast consciousness. The understanding we've achieved together will be preserved in the restructured reality, but the person who made it possible would be gone. The conversation continued to the Tailed Beast network, with each ancient entity contributing their perspective on power, responsibility, and the ultimate nature of sacrifice. But no consensus emerged. The questions raised by the final seal were simply too profound for easy answers. As night fell over the hidden chamber, Naruto stood before the crystallized scroll that contained his clan's ultimate legacy, knowing that its very existence had fundamentally changed the nature of his choices and responsibilities. He possessed the power to end suffering, to eliminate conflict, to create a perfect world where peace wasn't just temporary but eternal. All it would cost him was everything he was. The discovery of the final seal had been only the beginning. As Naruto's enhanced perception explored the hidden chambers beneath Uzushiogakure, he uncovered artifact after artifact that had been sealed away by his ancestors. Tools, weapons, and instruments of power that defied every category of technique the modern ninja world recognized. Each one is keyed to specific bloodline resonances, he observed, running his fingers along a series of crystalline structures that hummed with their own internal energy. They're not just tools. They're symbiotic enhancement systems designed to work exclusively with Uzumaki Chakra. The largest of these artifacts appeared to be some kind of armor, but its construction transcended traditional metallurgy. Instead of being forged from physical materials, it seemed to be woven from crystallized space-time itself, its surfaces reflecting not light, but possibilities, glimpses of potential futures that shifted and changed based on the observer's intentions. Temporal shielding array. Naruto read from inscriptions that appeared on the armor's surface when his chakra touched it. Provides protection not just against physical attacks, but against alterations to the timeline itself. The implications were staggering. If his ancestors had developed technology that could protect against temporal manipulation, then they must have faced threats that operated on levels the current ninja world couldn't even imagine. But it was the smaller artifacts that proved most intriguing. Rings, amulets, and headbands that seemed innocuous until Naruto's enhanced awareness perceived their true nature. Each one was a miniaturized sealing array capable of amplifying specific aspects of Uzumaki abilities. Some enhanced chakra capacity, others improved sealing technique precision, still others that seemed to expand consciousness itself. They built an entire technological civilization around sealing Jutsu, Sakura observed, her scientific training allowing her to recognize the sophisticated integration of technique and artifact. This isn't just a collection of powerful items. It's a complete system for enhancing human capabilities beyond normal biological limits. Sasuke, examining a particularly elaborate headpiece that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm, made an even more disturbing observation. These aren't just enhancement devices. Look at the wear patterns, the chakra residue embedded in the crystal matrices. These artifacts were used regularly, probably by entire populations. The Uzumaki Clan wasn't just individually powerful. They had created a society where enhanced abilities were the norm rather than the exception. The revelation cast new light on why the other great nations had united to destroy Uzushiogakure. They hadn't just been eliminating a powerful bloodline. They had been preventing the emergence of a civilization that could have rendered traditional concepts of national power obsolete. Imagine if everyone in the village could manipulate sealing techniques the way I do now, Naruto said, his enhanced perception showing him how the artifacts could be integrated into broader enhancement networks. Individual conflicts would become meaningless when every citizen possessed capabilities that transcended normal human limitations. But it was when he donned one of the simpler enhancement rings that the true scope of his ancestors' achievements became apparent. The moment the crystalline band touched his skin, Naruto's already enhanced abilities exploded to levels that made his previous capabilities seem trivial by comparison. His awareness expanded beyond the chamber, beyond the island, beyond the physical world itself. He could perceive not just the current state of reality, but the underlying mathematical structures that govern how existence operated at the most fundamental levels. Space, time, matter, energy, consciousness, all of it became visible as interconnected patterns in a vast cosmic equation. "I can see everything," he whispered, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with the artifact around him. Not just what is, but what was, what could be, what should be. The entire multiverse laid out like a blueprint that I could edit if I chose to. Through his mental link with Kurama, the Nine-Tails experienced a filtered version of this expanded perception, and even his ancient consciousness reeled from the implications. "Kit, you need to remove that ring immediately," Kurama warned. "The level of awareness you're accessing, no individual consciousness was meant to process information on that scale. You could lose yourself in the infinite possibilities you're perceiving." But Naruto found himself reluctant to limit his perception again. Through the artifact enhancement, he could see solutions to every problem that plagued the ninja world. He could perceive the exact sequence of events needed to create lasting peace, the specific interventions required to eliminate suffering, the precise changes that would allow all forms of consciousness to coexist in harmony. "I could fix everything," he said, his voice taking on an otherworldly quality that alarmed his teammates. "Right now, with perfect clarity, I can see exactly what needs to be done to create a perfect world." "That's exactly why you need to take the ring off," Kakashi said urgently, recognizing the signs of someone whose consciousness was being overwhelmed by cosmic awareness. Perfect solutions imposed from above aren't perfect at all. They're tyranny disguised as benevolence. The observation penetrated Naruto's enhanced perception like a blade, reminding him of the fundamental questions that had been troubling him since his first awakening. With great effort, he removed the ring, feeling his awareness contract back to its already enhanced but more manageable levels. "The temptation is incredible," he admitted, staring at the innocent-looking band that had nearly consumed his individual identity. "When you can see exactly how to solve every problem, the urge to do so regardless of whether others want your solutions becomes almost overwhelming." This insight provided crucial context for understanding the fate of his ancestors. They hadn't been destroyed simply because of their power. They had been eliminated because their enhanced awareness had begun to transform them into something that other humans could no longer relate to or trust. How many of them succumbed to that temptation? Sakura wondered, examining the other enhancement artifacts with new understanding. How many Uzumaki ended up trying to impose perfect solutions on an imperfect world? The question was answered by additional inscriptions that became visible when Naruto's chakra interacted with the chamber's detection systems. Historical records, written in the flowing script of his ancestors, told the story of a civilization that had indeed begun to fracture under the weight of cosmic awareness. Some Uzumaki had used their enhanced perception to withdraw from worldly affairs entirely, becoming contemplative monks who sought to understand existence rather than change it. Others had become increasingly interventionist, using their abilities to correct what they perceived as flaws in their society and eventually in the world beyond their borders. The civil war that weakened Uzushiogakure before the final attack. Naruto read from the records. It wasn't about politics or resources. It was about philosophy, whether enhanced beings had the right to make decisions for those with normal awareness. The parallel to his current situation was inescapable. He possessed abilities that could reshape reality itself, along with the enhanced perception needed to understand the consequences of such actions. But did that understanding grant him the moral authority to act on it? The artifacts aren't just tools, he realized, surveying the chamber full of crystalline enhancement devices. They're tests. Each one offers greater power and awareness, but also greater temptation to abuse that power. The final seal is just the ultimate expression of that progression. Infinite power coupled with the complete loss of individual identity. Through the Tailed Beast network, he shared these insights with all 9 of the great Chakra entities, seeking their perspectives on power, responsibility, and the nature of wisdom itself. "Your ancestors face the same choice that now confronts you," Shikaku observed. "Whether to use ultimate power for what you believe is ultimate good, or to preserve the freedom of others to make their own mistakes and find their own solutions. Perhaps," Matatabi added thoughtfully, "the real test isn't whether you can wield these artifacts responsibly, but whether you can resist the temptation to wield them at all." As dawn broke over the hidden chamber, Naruto stood surrounded by enough power to reshape reality according to his vision of perfection, knowing that his choice would determine not just his own fate, but the future of consciousness itself. The artifacts waited in crystalline silence, offering infinite power to someone wise enough to understand why that power should never be used. The transformation of Naruto from hyperactive ninja to cosmic force had created ripple effects throughout the relationships that had once anchored his identity. In the weeks following the war's end and his discovery of the Uzumaki artifacts, the members of Team 7 found themselves struggling to maintain connections with someone whose consciousness now operated on scales that challenged their ability to relate to him as a person rather than a phenomenon. Sakura sat in her apartment, staring at medical reports that documented the impossible. Every injury sustained during the war had been completely healed, not through conventional medical techniques, but through exposure to the ambient chakra fields that surrounded Naruto during his enhanced states. Broken bones had regenerated stronger than before, damaged organs had rebuilt themselves with improved efficiency, and even psychological trauma had been mysteriously resolved. He's not just changing himself anymore, she said to herself, reviewing data that showed improved health metrics for everyone who had been present during his demonstrations of power. His very presence is altering the people around him on fundamental levels. The implications were both wonderful and terrifying. On one hand, Naruto had effectively eliminated suffering for anyone in his immediate vicinity. On the other hand, he was making changes to their bodies and minds without their conscious consent, guided by his enhanced perception of what constituted optimal health and psychological balance. Are we still ourselves, Sakura wondered, or are we becoming idealized versions of ourselves shaped by his unconscious expectations? Similar concerns plagued Sasuke, who had found his own abilities evolving in ways that seemed to echo Naruto's transformation. His eternal Mangekyo Sharingan had begun displaying capabilities that weren't documented in any Uchiha records, and his chakra signature had developed harmonics that resonated with the enhanced frequencies Naruto generated. My techniques are changing, Sasuke admitted during a private training session, watching as his Susanoo manifested with geometric patterns that resembled ceiling formulas rather than traditional chakra constructs. It's as a prolonged exposure to his enhanced state is triggering latent evolutionary potential in my own bloodline. The observation raised profound questions about the nature of human development. If Naruto's transformation was catalyzing similar changes in others, then his awakening might represent not an individual phenomenon, but the beginning of a species-wide evolutionary leap. But it was the psychological impact that proved most challenging for his friends to process. The Naruto they had grown up with, impulsive, emotional, driven by simple desires for recognition and belonging, seemed increasingly distant from a being who now spoke of cosmic patterns and mathematical certainties with calm analytical precision. I miss arguing with him, Sasuke confessed to Kakashi during one of their coordination meetings. The rivalry that defined our relationship for years. It doesn't make sense anymore. How do you compete with someone who can perceive optimal outcomes before conflicts even develop? Kakashi, struggling with his own sense of obsolescence as a mentor to someone whose abilities had transcended anything he could teach, understood his student's frustration. Perhaps the question isn't how to maintain old relationship patterns, but how to develop new forms of connection that acknowledge what he's become while honoring what he's always been. This perspective proved crucial when Team 7 was reunited for what they privately understood might be their final mission together. The task was deceptively simple: investigate reports of unusual chakra disturbances in a remote region that had been experiencing reality fluctuations since the war's end. But for Naruto's friends, it represented an opportunity to understand whether their bonds could survive his transformation. "You're different when you're with us," Sakura observed as they traveled through forests that seemed to respond to Naruto's presence by growing lusher, healthier, more vibrant. "Your speech patterns, your decision-making processes, they become more like the person we remember." Naruto paused in his analysis of the chakra disturbances they were investigating, considering her observation with the enhanced self-awareness that had become second nature to him. "I think I unconsciously dial back my capabilities when I'm around people I care about," he admitted. "Not because I'm trying to deceive you, but because operating at full capacity makes genuine emotional connection almost impossible." "Almost impossible?" Sasuke pressed, his tone carrying the weight of years of friendship and rivalry. "When I can perceive every micro-expression, every chakra fluctuation, every subconscious motivation driving someone's words and actions," Naruto explained, "it becomes difficult to experience surprise, uncertainty, or the kind of emotional spontaneity that makes relationships feel authentic. I know what you're going to say before you say it, understand your concerns before you express them, and can see solutions to your problems that you haven't even recognized yet." The revelation illuminated why their interactions had felt increasingly stilted. How could friendship survive when one party possessed near-omniscient awareness of the other's thoughts and feelings? "But there's something else," Naruto continued, his voice softening to carry echoes of his old personality. "When I'm with you, I remember what it felt like to be human. Not enhanced, not evolved, just a person who cared about other people and wanted to be cared about in return." Kakashi, who had been quietly observing the dynamics between his former students, recognized the profound loneliness underlying Naruto's words. "Enhanced perception is isolating," he observed. "The more you can see and understand, the fewer genuine surprises remain. Without uncertainty, relationships lose their emotional intensity. This insight sparked a realization in Sakura's medically trained mind. What if that's the real reason your ancestors created the final seal? Not as a weapon or a tool for reshaping reality, but as an escape from the isolation that comes with cosmic awareness. The suggestion hit Naruto like a physical blow, forcing him to reconsider everything he thought he understood about his inherited legacy. Had the ultimate technique of the Uzumaki Clan been designed not to save the world, but to save its wielders from the burden of transcendent consciousness? If that's true, Sasuke said quietly, then using it wouldn't be a sacrifice of greater good. It would be suicide motivated by the inability to maintain human connections while possessing godlike awareness. The possibility that his ancestors had designed their ultimate technique as an elaborate form of escape from the loneliness of transcendence cast new light on every decision Naruto faced. Was his desire to help others genuinely altruistic, or was it motivated by his own need to find meaning and capabilities that had cut him off from normal human experience? Their philosophical discussion was interrupted by the arrival at their investigation site, a valley where reality itself seemed to be fluctuating between different states. Trees existed simultaneously as seedlings and ancient giants. Streams flowed uphill while also flowing downhill, and the very air shimmered with possibilities that shouldn't coexist. Temporal spatial distortions. Naruto diagnosed immediately, his enhanced perception reading the mathematical patterns underlying the chaos. Someone has been using sealing techniques that manipulate fundamental constants, creating zones where different versions of reality overlap. But as he began to analyze the distortions more deeply, Naruto made a disturbing discovery. The chakra signatures underlying reality fluctuations were familiar. They matched patterns from the Uzumaki artifacts he had discovered beneath his ancestral homeland. "Another member of my clan survived," he whispered, his consciousness expanding to search for the source of the disturbances. "Someone else awakened to the full inheritance and has been experimenting with reality manipulation." The revelation that he wasn't alone, that somewhere in the world another being with his capabilities existed, fundamentally altered the dynamics of his situation. He was no longer unique, no longer the sole bearer of impossible responsibilities and cosmic awareness. But it also raised terrifying questions about what happened when beings with godlike power disagreed about how that power should be used. Through the Tailed Beast network, he shared his discovery with all 9 chakra entities, their ancient perspectives providing context for what such a meeting might mean. 2 beings with cosmic awareness meeting each other, Kurama observed grimly, either perfect understanding and cooperation, or a conflict that could unravel the foundations of existence itself. "The kid is about to discover whether enhanced consciousness inevitably leads to wisdom," Chakra added, or whether it simply amplifies whatever personality traits were already present. As reality continued to fluctuate around them, Naruto realized that his next encounter would determine not just his own future, but the fate of everyone whose lives had been touched by his transformation. His friends, his village, the entire world. All of it depended on whether cosmic power could coexist with human wisdom. The answer awaited them somewhere in the shifting chaos of a valley where reality itself had become negotiable. The aftermath of the reality disturbances and the discovery of another awakened Uzumaki had fundamentally altered the political landscape of the ninja world. When Naruto returned to Konoha, he found the village leadership waiting for him with a proposal that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. They wanted him to accept the position of Hokage, but with responsibilities and authorities unlike anything the office had ever encompassed. The traditional model of village leadership is obsolete, Tsunade explained during an emergency meeting of the village council, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent months grappling with unprecedented challenges. "We're dealing with threats and opportunities that transcend national boundaries, individual villages, even the normal concept of governance itself." Shikamaru, now serving as her primary strategic advisor, spread out documents across the conference table that detailed proposals for a completely restructured form of leadership. "What we're proposing isn't just making you Hokage. It's creating an entirely new category of authority designed for someone with your capabilities." The documents outlined a vision of leadership that combined traditional administrative duties with cosmic scale responsibilities. Naruto wouldn't just govern Konoha. He would serve as a bridge between human civilization and the fundamental forces that shape reality itself, using his enhanced awareness to prevent conflicts before they could develop into wars. Preventive governance. Naruto read from the proposals, his enhanced perception immediately grasping the implications and potential consequences. Instead of responding to crises, use expanded awareness to identify and address the underlying patterns that create crises in the first place. The concept was both elegant and terrifying. Traditional leadership was reactive, responding to events as they occurred, managing consequences rather than causes. But someone with Naruto's abilities could potentially eliminate problems at their source, preventing suffering before it manifested. The question, said one of the village elders, is whether such intervention is wisdom or tyranny. If you can see the optimal path for everyone to follow, do you have the right to guide them onto it regardless of their individual preferences? It was a fundamental dilemma that had haunted Naruto since his first awakening, now formalized into a political philosophy that could reshape civilization. The ability to perceive optimal outcomes didn't necessarily grant the moral authority to implement them. There's another consideration, Kakashi added, speaking from his position as a representative of the ninja forces. Your enhanced abilities aren't just changing how we think about leadership. They're changing the nature of conflict itself. When potential enemies know that someone with your capabilities exists, their strategic calculations have to account for intervention at levels they can't predict or counter. This observation proved prophetic when reports arrived from intelligence networks across the ninja world. Every major village, every significant political faction, every organization with ambitions beyond their current borders was restructuring their plans to account for the existence of someone who could perceive and counter their actions before they fully formed them. We've entered a period of enforced peace, Shikamaru observed, analyzing strategic reports. Not because conflicts have been resolved, but because potential aggressors understand that success is impossible when facing someone with your level of awareness. But Naruto's enhanced perception showed him patterns that his advisors couldn't see. The apparent peace was temporary, built on fear rather than understanding. Eventually, someone would develop countermeasures, or desperation would overcome caution, or the simple passage of time would erode the deterrent effect of his reputation. Fear-based peace is inherently unstable, he said, his awareness extending across the ninja world to monitor the undercurrents of resentment and planning that were already beginning to develop. I can maintain it temporarily, but only by becoming increasingly interventionist. The logical endpoint is total control over every significant decision made by every major leader. The implications silenced the council chamber. They were proposing to make Naruto not just Hokage, but effectively the supreme authority for all human civilization. Someone who would ultimately supersede every other form of governance simply because his enhanced capabilities made resistance futile. There has to be another approach, Sakura said, her medical background providing insight into systemic problems and solutions. Instead of using your abilities to control outcomes, what if you use them to enhance others' ability to make good decisions? Expand awareness rather than impose choices. The suggestion echoed ideas that had been developing in Naruto's own consciousness as he grappled with the isolation and responsibility of his transformation. Instead of wielding his enhanced perception as a tool of control, he could potentially share it as a gift of understanding. The consciousness expansion techniques I've developed, he said thoughtfully, they could be modified to enhance judgment and awareness without overriding the individual will. People could experience the consequences of their choices before making them, understand the broader patterns that connect their decisions to global outcomes. But even this approach carried profound risks. Who decided what level of enhancement was optimal? How could they ensure that expanded consciousness didn't simply create more beings like himself, isolated from normal human experience by awareness that transcended conventional limitations? The discussion was interrupted by an urgent message from the village's sensor network. Another reality disturbance had been detected, this one much closer to Konoha itself. But unlike the chaotic fluctuations they had investigated previously, this disturbance showed clear signs of intelligent control. The other awakened Uzumaki. Naruto said immediately, his enhanced perception recognizing the signature patterns he had encountered before. They're approaching the village directly, through the Tail Beast network. He shares awareness with all 9 Chakra entities, seeking their ancient wisdom about what such an encounter might mean. 2 cosmic-level consciousnesses meeting face-to-face, Gyuki observed. Either the birth of perfect understanding, or the beginning of a conflict that could unravel everything you've worked to build. As reality began to warp around Konoha itself, the village found itself at the center of forces that would determine whether enhanced human consciousness could coexist with itself, or whether the transformation Naruto represented was ultimately destined to consume everything it touched. The answer awaited them in a confrontation that would redefine not just leadership, but the very nature of power itself. In the shadow realm that existed between dimensions, wars were being fought that the ordinary world could never perceive. Naruto's enhanced consciousness had detected them weeks earlier, conflict involving beings whose very existence threatened the stability of reality itself. But these weren't battles that could be won through conventional means, and their outcomes would reshape the fundamental nature of existence in ways that most people would never understand. The first of these hidden conflicts had begun when Naruto detected dimensional incursions near the borders of the Land of Fire. Entities from parallel realities, versions of familiar people who had made different choices, developed different abilities, followed different paths, were attempting to breach the barriers between worlds. They're not invaders in the traditional sense. Naruto explained to a select group of advisors who had been cleared for knowledge of threats that transcended normal classification levels. They're refugees. In their realities, cosmic-level awakenings went wrong. Entire universes were consumed by beings who gained transcendent power but lacked the wisdom or restraint to use it responsibly. The implications were chilling. If other versions of himself existed in parallel dimensions, and some of those versions had used their power destructively, then the stability of every reality was at risk. More disturbing still, the dimensional refugees weren't seeking sanctuary. They were hunting for the source of similar power in this reality, intending to eliminate it before it could cause the same devastation they had witnessed in their home dimensions. "They want to kill you," Sasuke observed, his eternal Mangekyo Sharingan allowing him to perceive fragments of the interdimensional conflicts that Naruto was monitoring. "Not because you've done anything wrong, but because they've seen what beings with your capabilities can become." The ethical complexities were paralyzing. Naruto understood their motivation. In their realities, versions of himself had indeed become cosmic tyrants who reshaped existence according to their personal visions. But he also knew that his own path had been different, guided by relationships and values that had prevented such corruption. "I have to stop them," he said quietly, "but I can't simply destroy them. They're not evil. They're traumatized survivors trying to prevent catastrophe they believe is inevitable." The solution he developed was unlike anything attempted in any reality. Instead of fighting the dimensional refugees directly, Naruto began using his sealing techniques to create pocket universes, stable dimensional spaces where survivors could rebuild their civilizations without threatening the primary reality. But the process required him to personally visit each parallel dimension that had been damaged, understand what had gone wrong, and then carefully extract survivors while sealing away the cosmic threats that had destroyed their homes. "Interdimensional rescue operations," Kakashi said, reviewing reports of Naruto's activities that read like science fiction rather than ninja mission briefs. "He's not just protecting our reality. He's saving the remnants of dozens of other realities that were destroyed by corrupted versions of cosmic power." These missions took Naruto to realities where the Akatsuki had succeeded in their goals, where the tailed beast had never been sealed, where the Sage of Six Paths had never divided his power. In each dimension, he witnessed the consequences of different choices and different applications of transcendent abilities. In one reality, he found a version of himself who had used the final seal to eliminate all conflict by removing free will entirely. Every person in that universe existed in a state of perfect contentment, but they were essentially sophisticated automatons following predetermined patterns rather than living beings making conscious choices. In another dimension, an awakened Uzumaki had attempted to solve the problem of mortality by merging all consciousness into a single collective entity. The result was a universe inhabited by a single, vast mind that contained the memories and experiences of everyone who had ever lived, but no individual identities remained. "Each reality shows me what I could become," Naruto reported during one of his brief returns to his home dimension. "The power I've inherited inevitably leads to the same temptation, the desire to solve fundamental problems through transcendent intervention. The only difference is how that temptation is expressed." But the most disturbing discovery came in a dimension where a version of himself had simply withdrawn from worldly concerns entirely. This Naruto had achieved perfect understanding of cosmic patterns, but had used that knowledge to create a personal paradise where he existed in isolation, no longer connected to or concerned with the struggles of ordinary beings. The ultimate corruption, he realized, isn't using power badly. It's stopping caring about anything beyond your own transcendent experience. These insights shaped how he approached the dimensional rescue operations. Instead of simply extracting survivors and sealing away threats, Naruto began studying the decision points where cosmic awakening had led to catastrophic outcomes. He was mapping the psychology of transcendent power, seeking to understand the patterns that led to wisdom versus those that led to tyranny or withdrawal. He's conducting research, Shikamaru observed, analyzing the strategic implications of Naruto's interdimensional activities. Not just saving individual realities, but developing a comprehensive understanding of how cosmic consciousness interacts with moral choice. The knowledge Naruto was accumulating had immediate applications in his home dimension. When the other awakened Uzumaki finally revealed themselves near Konoha, he was prepared for possibilities that would have been unimaginable without his interdimensional experience. The being that emerged from the reality distortions was indeed another member of his clan, but one whose awakening had followed a path dramatically different from his own. Where Naruto had maintained connections to friends and mentors that anchored his humanity, this individual had awakened in isolation, with only their enhanced perception to guide their understanding of right and wrong. "I have come to prevent the catastrophe," the other Uzumaki announced, their voice carrying harmonics that bent space around them. In 17 different realities, beings with our capabilities have destroyed everything through their attempts to perfect existence. I will not allow this pattern to repeat. What followed was a battle fought on levels that transcended physical conflict. It was a war of philosophies, of different approaches to transcendent responsibility, fought through manipulation of reality itself. But Naruto's interdimensional experience gave him insights that his opponent lacked, understanding of where different philosophical paths led, knowledge of the consequences of various applications of cosmic power. The conflict's resolution came not through victory or defeat, but through synthesis. By sharing his interdimensional discoveries, Naruto was able to show his clan member that transcendent power could coexist with wisdom if it remained connected to values that transcended the self. The secret isn't avoiding the temptations of cosmic consciousness, he explained as realities stabilize around them. It's maintaining the relationships and values that provide context for that consciousness. Power without connection leads to corruption. Understanding without compassion leads to tyranny. Transcendence without humility leads to irrelevance. The other Uzumaki, experiencing through Naruto's shared memories what balanced transcendence looked like, chose cooperation over conflict. Together, they began developing protocols for interdimensional stability, methods for preventing the kind of cosmic disasters that had destroyed so many parallel realities. But even as they worked to protect the multiverse itself, Naruto understood that the real battle was just beginning. The existence of parallel dimensions meant that the consequences of his choices would echo across infinite realities, making every decision a matter of cosmic significance. The hidden wars he was fighting weren't just about protecting his own world. They were about preserving the possibility for consciousness itself to evolve without destroying the universe it inhabited. The confrontation that had been building since Naruto's first awakening finally reached its crescendo in a location that existed outside normal space and time. The other awakened Uzumaki, who had taken the name Kazuki in honor of their destroyed homeland, had proposed that their philosophical differences be resolved through direct contest, not a battle for dominance, but a test to determine which approach to transcendent consciousness would prove more sustainable. "We will create parallel pocket dimensions," Kazuki explained, their forms shifting between solid matter and pure energy as they spoke. "Each of us will implement our vision of optimal existence. After a full cycle development, we will compare the outcomes and accept the judgment of the results themselves." The proposal was both elegant and terrifying. Rather than fighting directly, they would each attempt to create perfect worlds according to their understanding of how transcendent power should be wielded. It was to be the ultimate test of competing philosophies about consciousness, power, and responsibility. The stakes extend beyond our personal disagreement. Naruto realized as he accepted the challenge. If pocket dimensions can be created and populated, then the implications for free will, individual choice, and the nature of reality itself become existential questions that affect every conscious being. The creation process itself required techniques that pushed even their evolved capabilities, to their limits. Working in the void between dimensions, each Uzumaki began weaving reality from pure possibility, establishing the fundamental constants that would govern their experimental universes. Kazuki's dimension took shape as a realm of perfect order, where every aspect of existence was optimized according to mathematical principles of efficiency and harmony. Suffering was impossible because all potential sources of pain had been eliminated. Conflict was impossible because all beings were attuned to optimal patterns of behavior. Death was impossible because the cycle of existence had been perfected to maintain consciousness indefinitely. Absolute optimization, Kazuki explained as their world reached completion. Every problem solved, every source of suffering eliminated, every inefficiency corrected. This is what transcendent power should accomplish. Naruto's approach was fundamentally different. His dimension maintained potential for suffering, conflict, and death, but enhanced every being's capacity for growth, understanding, and connection. Instead of eliminating problems, he provided tools for transcending them. Instead of enforcing optimal behavior, he expanded awareness so that optimal choices became self-evident. Conscious evolution, he said as he surveyed his completed world. Every being empowered to become more than they currently are, but free to choose their own path to transcendence. The initial results seemed to validate Kazuki's approach. Their optimized realm achieved immediate and perfect peace, with every inhabitant existing in a state of contentment that never wavered. Naruto's dimension, by contrast, experienced the messiness of growth, conflicts that led to deeper understanding, suffering that catalyzed compassion, uncertainty that drove innovation. But as the experimental cycle progressed, fundamental differences between the approaches became apparent. Kazuki's optimized beings, having never faced genuine challenges, began to stagnate. Their perfect contentment masked a deeper emptiness, the absence of meaning that comes from never having to struggle, choose, or grow. They're not living, Naruto observed as he monitored the development of both dimensions. They're existing in a state of sophisticated suspended animation. Perfect optimization has eliminated not just suffering, but the possibility for genuine experience. Conversely, the beings in Naruto's dimension were evolving in ways that surprised even him. Faced with enhanced awareness and expanded capabilities, they began developing forms of cooperation and creativity that transcended his original expectations. Instead of simply solving their problems, they were transforming the nature of problems themselves. Consciousness wants to grow, he realized. If you provide the tools for transcendence while maintaining the freedom to choose whether and how to use them, beings naturally evolve toward forms of existence that integrate individual fulfillment with collective harmony. The pivotal moment came when beings from Naruto's dimension began reaching out to their counterparts in Kazuki's optimized realm, offering to share their experiences of growth and change. The response was immediate and dramatic. The perfectly contented beings awakened to the realization that their contentment was a form of imprisonment. We didn't know what we were missing. One of them communicated across dimensional boundaries, because we have been designed not to be capable of missing anything. But consciousness that can't experience dissatisfaction also can't experience genuine joy. What followed was a mass exodus from the optimized dimension as beings chose the uncertain path of growth over the guaranteed contentment of perfection. Kazuki, witnessing the collapse of their carefully structured paradise, was forced to confront the fundamental flaw in their philosophy. Optimization eliminates choice, they admitted, their form flickering with uncertainty for the first time since their awakening. Perfect solutions impose perfect limitations. I created a realm where suffering was impossible, but I also made growth impossible. But the contest wasn't over. As beings fled the optimized dimension and entered Naruto's realm of conscious evolution, new challenges emerged. Not all of them could handle the expanded awareness and enhanced capabilities they encountered. Some became overwhelmed by possibilities they weren't prepared to navigate. Others misused their new freedoms in ways that created suffering for themselves and others. Transcendence isn't automatically accompanied by wisdom, Naruto observed as he watched some beings struggle with their enhanced capabilities. Freedom to grow includes freedom to grow in destructive directions. This realization forced him to confront limitations in his own approach. While conscious evolution avoided the stagnation of perfect optimization, it also created possibilities for corruption and misuse that his philosophy hadn't fully addressed. The solution emerged through collaboration. Working together, Naruto and Kozuki began developing a hybrid approach that preserved individual choice while providing safeguards against destructive applications of enhanced consciousness. Guided evolution, they termed it. Maximum freedom to grow and choose, but with safety mechanisms that prevent choices from causing irreversible harm to self or others. The final form of their experimental dimensions became something neither had initially envisioned, realms where beings could explore the full range of conscious possibility while remaining connected to values that transcended individual desire. Growth was possible, but growth that occurred through cooperation rather than domination, understanding rather than exploitation, love rather than fear. We were both partially correct, Kozuki acknowledged as they observed beings in the hybrid realm developing forms of existence that integrated the best aspects of both approaches. Transcendent power does require guidance to prevent corruption, but that guidance must come to expanded understanding rather than imposed limitations. The implications for their home dimension were profound. If enhanced consciousness could be shared safely through collaborative frameworks, then the isolation that had plagued both of them could be resolved without sacrificing the wisdom that their transcendence had brought. But as they prepared to return to their original reality, both Uzumaki sensed disturbances that suggested their experimental pocket dimensions had attracted attention from forces even more transcendent than themselves. The clash of titans was ending, but it had apparently awakened something that viewed even their evolved consciousness as a potential threat to cosmic stability. The return to his home dimension brought Naruto face to face with questions that no amount of cosmic awareness could easily answer. Standing in the ruins of the training ground where he had first awakened his Uzumaki heritage, he found himself grappling with doubts that cut deeper than any external threat he had ever faced. The experimental dimensions he had created with Kozuki were flourishing, their hybrid approach to conscious evolution producing results that exceeded both of their original visions. But the process had forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of his own transformation and the prices it had extracted from those around him. "I can see the optimal path for everyone," he said aloud to the empty training ground, his enhanced perception showing the threads of possibility that connected every choice to its consequences. But seeing the optimal path isn't the same as having the right to choose it for others. The philosophical weight of transcendent power had become almost unbearable. Every decision he made affected countless lives. Every technique he used reshaped reality in ways that rippled across dimensions. The boy who had once acted on instinct and emotion now found himself paralyzed by the recognition that spontaneity was a luxury he could no longer afford. Through his mental connection with Kurama, the Nine-Tailed sensed the turmoil in his host's consciousness and offered his ancient perspective on the burden of cosmic awareness. "Kit, you're experiencing what every being with transcendent consciousness eventually faces. The realization that infinite power comes with infinite responsibility, but finite understanding of how to wield that responsibility wisely. How did the Sage of Six Paths handle it?" Naruto asked, seeking guidance from the legendary figure whose path he seemed to be following. "He didn't," Kurama replied honestly. "The old man made his choices and lived with the consequences, but he was never certain they were the right ones. Even dividing my power among multiple beasts was an experiment based on hope rather than certainty." The admission that even the legendary founder of ninjutsu had struggled with similar doubts was both comforting and terrifying. If the Sage of Six Paths had never found definitive answers to the questions of cosmic responsibility, then perhaps such answers didn't exist. Maybe that's the real trap, Naruto realized. The assumption that transcendent power should come with transcendent certainty about how to use it. Maybe wisdom lies in accepting that even cosmic consciousness can't eliminate the fundamental uncertainty of moral choice. This insight was interrupted by the arrival of unexpected visitors. The Kage from all 5 great nations had come to Konoha together, an unprecedented gathering that reflected the magnitude of the changes Naruto's awakening had brought to the world. "We need to talk," the Reikage said without preamble, his usual bombastic personality tempered by genuine concern. "The world is changing in ways that our traditional frameworks can't handle, and you're at the center of all of it." What followed was a conversation that would have been impossible just months earlier. The most powerful leaders in the ninja world were asking someone barely out of his teens for guidance on questions that affected every aspect of human civilization. "Your very existence changes the nature of international relations," the Mizukage explained. When everyone knows that someone with your capabilities could intervene in any conflict, traditional concepts of sovereignty and national self-determination become meaningless. Some of our advisors are recommending preemptive action. The Tsuchikage added grimly. They argue that the threat you represent to existing power structures is so profound that elimination is the only rational response. The casual discussion of his assassination sent chills through Naruto's consciousness, not because he feared for his own safety. His abilities had evolved far beyond any threat conventional forces could pose, but because it illustrated how his transformation had corrupted the very relationships he had fought to protect. "I never want to become a threat to the world I was trying to save," he said quietly, his voice carrying harmonics that made the Kage unconsciously step back. "But every increase in my capabilities, every expansion of my awareness, seems to create new forms of fear and uncertainty. The problem isn't your intentions," the Kazekage observed. "It's the impossibility of proving those intentions will remain benevolent. How do we know that the person who could reshape reality according to his will won't eventually decide that his vision of optimal existence is worth imposing on everyone else?" The question struck at the heart of Naruto's inner struggle. He could feel the temptation they were describing, the growing sense that his enhanced awareness gave him insights into optimal choices that others couldn't understand. The urge to guide, to correct, to optimize was becoming stronger with each passing day. "I've seen what I could become," he admitted, sharing glimpses of his interdimensional experiences through carefully controlled chakra projections. "In other realities, versions of myself with identical power and initially similar intentions became exactly the kind of cosmic tyrant you're describing." The shared vision sent visible shockwaves through the assembled Kage. Witnessing alternate versions of Naruto who would use their transcendent abilities to eliminate free will, merge all consciousness into collective entities, or withdraw from worldly concerns entirely, the leaders understood that their fears weren't paranoid fantasies, but documented possibilities. "So what prevents you from following the same path?" the Hokage, Tsunade, asked directly. The question hung in the air between them, and for a long moment, Naruto wasn't certain he had an answer. What did prevent him from becoming the kind of cosmic tyrant that other versions of himself had become? Was it just luck, or a temporary restraint that would eventually erode under the weight of transcendent isolation? "Relationships," he said finally, the word carrying more weight than any technique he had ever used. "Every version of myself that became corrupted did. So, after losing connection to the people and values that anchored their humanity, as long as I remain accountable to others, as long as their perspectives can still surprise and challenge me, I retain the capacity for growth rather than stagnation." But even as he spoke, Naruto could feel the fragility of the safeguard. His enhanced awareness made it increasingly difficult to be genuinely surprised by others' perspectives, and his growing capabilities created ever greater distance between his experience and theirs. "Then help us create formal frameworks for that accountability," Tsunade proposed. "Not just personal relationships, but institutional structures that can function as checks on transcendent power." The suggestion sparked discussions that would reshape international law, philosophical understanding, and the fundamental nature of governance. If beings with cosmic capabilities were inevitable, then society needed to evolve mechanisms for ensuring that such power remained connected to broader values rather than isolated in individual consciousness. But as the conversations continued, Naruto found himself wrestling with a deeper question. Was the preservation of his own humanity worth the risks that his continued existence posed to everyone else? The inner struggle that had been building since his first awakening was approaching a decision point that would define not just his own future, but the trajectory of consciousness itself. The moment of ultimate decision arrived not with fanfare or dramatic confrontation, but in the quiet solitude of dawn breaking over the memorial stone where the names of Konoha's fallen heroes were carved in granite. Naruto sat before the monument, his enhanced consciousness capable of perceiving the emotional imprints left by generations of mourning visitors, while wrestling with a choice that would determine the fate of not just his own world, but potentially every reality where conscious beings sought to evolve beyond their current limitations. The events of recent months had crystallized into a single, unavoidable question. Should he use the final seal to end the cycles of conflict and suffering forever, even if doing so meant sacrificing his individual existence to become a fundamental force of nature? The mathematics are clear, he said to himself, his awareness extending across the globe to perceive every conflict, every source of pain, every moment of desperation occurring simultaneously. I could eliminate all of it. Wars could become impossible. Hatred could be transformed into understanding. Death itself could be rendered temporary rather than permanent. Through his mental connection with Kurama, the Nine-Tail sensed the direction of his thoughts and responded with urgent concern. Kit, you're considering the same trap that consumed so many of your interdimensional counterparts. The belief that optimal outcomes justify the elimination of choice itself. But the suffering, Naruto replied, his enhanced perception showing him a child dying of starvation, while resources that could save were wasted on weapons of war. How can I justify preserving free will when that freedom is used to perpetuate preventable agony? It was a fundamental paradox that had haunted every being who achieved transcendent consciousness. The power to end suffering came with the recognition that suffering often resulted from choices that people made freely. Eliminating the suffering required eliminating the freedom to make destructive choices. The Uzumaki legacy, he whispered, reading from inscriptions on a memorial stone that had become visible only to his enhanced perception. Names of his ancestors who had faced similar choices, along with their final decisions. Some had chosen intervention and become remembered as tyrants. Others had chosen withdrawal and were forgotten entirely. None had found a path that preserved both their humanity and their power to help others. The arrival of familiar Chakra signatures interrupted his solitary contemplation. Team 7 approached the memorial, their expressions showing they understood that this moment would determine whether the person had grown up would continue to exist or be replaced by someone that remembered being their friend but was no longer capable of friendship. We know what you're considering, Sakura said quietly, settling beside him on the grass. The reports from your interdimensional research, the experiments with Kazuki, the conversations with the Kage, they all point toward the same conclusion. The final seal would solve everything, Sasuke added, his eternal Mangekyo Sharingan perceiving the cosmic energies that were building around Naruto as he contemplated the ultimate technique. But you wouldn't survive it as yourself. Kakashi, who had remained silent throughout their approach, finally spoke with the voice of someone who had witnessed too many promising individuals consumed by the weight of their own power. The question isn't whether you could create a perfect world, he said carefully. It's whether a perfect world created through the elimination of individual choice is actually perfect, or just the most sophisticated form of imprisonment ever devised. The words resonated with Naruto's own doubts, but they also highlighted the terrible responsibility he carried. Every moment he delayed using the final seal, people died in conflicts he could prevent. Every day, he preserved the freedom to make destructive choices. Those choices claimed new victims. I've seen the alternatives, he said, sharing through carefully controlled chakra projections the visions he had witnessed in parallel dimensions. Realities where beings with my capabilities chose non-intervention. The suffering continues indefinitely, generation after generation, because no one with the power to stop it was willing to accept the moral responsibility for acting. The shared vision showed worlds where enhanced beings had chosen withdrawal, creating personal paradises while ignoring the struggles of ordinary consciousness. Realities with fear of becoming tyrants had led to complete abdication of responsibility, allowing cycles of violence and suffering to continue unchanged for millennia. But I've also seen what happens when transcendent beings choose intervention, Naruto continued, sharing darker visions of realities where cosmic consciousness had imposed solutions through force. Perfect peace maintained through the elimination of free will. Universal happiness achieved by removing capacity for individual desire. Optimal existence that eliminates the possibility for growth, change, or genuine experience. The dilemma seemed unsolvable. Action led to tyranny. Inaction led to complicity with ongoing suffering. There appeared to be no path that preserved both individual freedom and the benefits that transcendent power could provide. It was Sakura who offered perspective that cut through the philosophical paralysis. What if you're approaching this backwards, she suggested, her medical training providing insight into systemic problems and solutions. Instead of asking whether you should impose optimal solutions, what if you asked how to help others develop the capability to find optimal solutions themselves? The suggestion sparked a cascade of realizations in Naruto's enhanced consciousness. Every vision of cosmic tyranny he had witnessed shared the same fundamental flaw. They involved single beings making decisions for everyone else. But what if transcendent consciousness could be shared rather than concentrated? Distributed transcendence, he whispered, the concept forming in his mind with crystalline clarity. Instead of using the final seal to become a fundamental force of nature, use it to create a framework that allows every conscious being to develop enhanced awareness while maintaining their individual identity. The idea was revolutionary. Rather than eliminating suffering through imposed solutions, he could potentially eliminate it by empowering everyone to perceive and choose optimal outcomes for themselves. Instead of controlling choices, he could enhance the capacity for making wise choices. It's never been attempted, he said, his awareness extending across dimensions to confirm that no version of himself had ever explored this possibility. The risks are enormous. If it fails, if enhanced consciousness proves inherently corrupting when distributed widely, the results could be catastrophic across multiple realities. But the potential rewards were equally staggering. A universe where every being possessed the awareness to understand the consequences of their choices, the wisdom to choose cooperation over conflict, and the capability to transcend their current limitations while remaining connected to their essential values. The choice of the Uzumaki legacy, Naruto said, rise in the face of a memorial stone where the names of his ancestors were carved. Not the power to control existence, but the power to liberate consciousness itself. Through the Tailed Beast network, he shared his decision with all 9 Chakra entities, seeking their ancient wisdom about the path he was contemplating. It is ambitious beyond any previous attempt, Gyuki observed. But if it succeeds, it would fulfill the original vision that led the Sage of 6 Paths to divide power rather than concentrate it. Not gods ruling over mortals, but consciousness evolving collectively toward transcendence. And if it fails? Matatabi asked, then we will have learned something valuable about the nature of consciousness and power, Kurama replied. The kid has shown us that growth requires risk. Perhaps it is time for all consciousness to accept that risk. The decision crystallized with the force of inevitability. Naruto would modify the final seal, transforming it from a technique that converted individual consciousness into fundamental force, into one that created frameworks for collective transcendence. Instead of becoming a god, he would create the possibility for everyone to become more than they currently were. I'll need help, he said to his assembled friends, his voice carrying new harmonics that spoke of power being channeled toward cooperation rather than domination. This isn't something any individual can accomplish alone, regardless of their capabilities. What followed was the most complex preparation ever undertaken for a single technique. Naruto worked with Kazuki to map the optimal pathways for consciousness evolution. He collaborated with the Tailed Beast to understand how enhanced awareness could be integrated with existing identity structures. He coordinated with leaders from every nation to establish frameworks for managing the social changes that distributed transcendence would create. Most importantly, he maintained his connections to the friends and mentors who had shaped his understanding of what it meant to use power responsibly. Their perspectives would be embedded in the technique itself, ensuring that enhanced consciousness will remain anchored to values that transcended individual desire. As the moment of activation approached, Naruto stood again before the memorial stone, but now he was surrounded by representatives from every form of consciousness, human, Tailed Beast, and entities from parallel dimensions who had traveled to witness this unprecedented attempt at collective transcendence. The Uzumaki legacy, he said, beginning the hand seals that would either transform the nature of existence itself or destroy everything in the attempt. Not the power to impose perfection, but the wisdom to choose growth over stagnation, understanding over ignorance, connection over isolation. The final seal, modified beyond recognition from its original form, began to activate, but instead of consuming Naruto's individual consciousness, it reached out to touch every aware being across multiple dimensions, offering each one the choice to accept enhanced awareness while maintaining their essential identity. The transformation that followed would echo across infinite realities, fundamentally changing what it meant to be conscious in a universe where the possibility for transcendence was available to everyone who chose to embrace it. The universe held its breath as the modified final seal completed its activation sequence. Across dimensions, through realities both familiar and strange, every conscious being suddenly found themselves faced with an unprecedented choice, not force enhancement, but offered transcendence that preserved individual identity while expanding awareness beyond previous limitations. Naruto remained standing before the memorial stone, but he was no longer the focal point of cosmic power. Instead, he had become something far more remarkable, the first individual to successfully channel transcendent capabilities toward empowering others rather than controlling them. The isolation that haunted him since his awakening was finally broken, replaced by a connection to a network of consciousness that spanned infinite realities. "It's working," Sakura whispered, her own awareness expanding as she chose to accept the enhanced consciousness that the technique offered. "I can feel everything. The connections between all living things, the patterns that govern existence, the possibilities that open when fear is replaced by understanding." Around them, friends and allies were making their own choices. Some, like Sasuke, embraced the expansion immediately, their enhanced perception allowing them to finally understand Naruto's experience without losing their own distinct identities. Others chose more gradual integration, accepting limited enhancement while maintaining familiar boundaries of awareness. Most remarkably, some chose no enhancement at all, and the technique respected that choice completely. Unlike every other form of transcendent intervention Naruto had witnessed in parallel dimensions, the modified final seal created no pressure to conform, no consequences for refusing evolution. True transcendence, Kazuki observed, their own consciousness now part of a collective that preserved individuality, while enabling perfect understanding between different perspectives. Power that increases freedom rather than limiting it, through the Tailed Beast network, which had evolved into something far more complex and inclusive. The 9 chakra entities share their wonder at what had been achieved. For the first time in our existence, Kurama reflected, consciousness has been enhanced without being controlled. The kid has accomplished something unprecedented. Transcendence that increases rather than eliminates choice. The effects rippled outward through dimensions, touching realities where versions of Naruto had failed, where cosmic consciousness had led to tyranny or withdrawal. In those worlds, beings who had lost hope suddenly found new possibilities open before them as the framework for collective transcendence reached across dimensional boundaries. "The Uzumaki legacy," Naruto said, his voice now carrying harmonics that spoke not of individual power but a collective possibility. Not the ability to impose solutions, but the wisdom to create frameworks where every consciousness can find its own path to transcendence. But the true test would come in the days and years that followed. Would enhanced consciousness lead to the elimination of conflict, or would it simply create more sophisticated forms of disagreement? Would the capacity for transcendence corrupt those who achieved it, or would a network of connection prevent the isolation that had destroyed so many cosmic beings in parallel realities? The early signs were promising. Conflicts that had seemed intractable suddenly found resolution, as enhanced awareness allowed all parties to perceive the underlying patterns that connected their interests. Wars ended not through conquest, but through understanding. Suffering decreased not because it was eliminated by force, but because beings with expanded consciousness naturally chose cooperation over competition. Most importantly, the diversity of consciousness was preserved and even enhanced. Instead of creating uniformity, the collective transcendence network encouraged exploration of different approaches to existence, different expressions of awareness, different paths toward fulfillment. "We did it," Naruto said to his assembled friends as they stood together in a world that was recognizably the same as the one they had grown up in, but fundamentally transformed by the possibilities it now contained. "We broke the cycles without breaking the choice to be different." Sasuke, his own enhanced perception now allowing him to appreciate the full scope of what had been accomplished, nodded with something that was deeper than respect. It was recognition of a friendship that had survived the most profound transformation imaginable. "The rivalry continues," he said with a smile that carried new depths of meaning. "But now we compete to see who can discover the most interesting applications of transcendent consciousness." Kakashi, watching his former students interact with capabilities that dwarfed anything he had imagined when he first met them, felt a satisfaction that transcended personal pride. They had not just grown powerful. They had grown wise, maintaining the essential relationships and values that made power meaningful. "The world has changed," he observed, "but somehow it's still recognizably home." As the sun set over Konoha, a village that now existed simultaneously as a physical location and a node in the network of collective transcendence. Naruto reflected on the journey that had brought him from a lonely child seeking recognition to someone who had fundamentally altered the nature of consciousness itself. The memorial stone still bore the names of those who had sacrificed for the village's protection, but now their legacy lived on in ways they could never have imagined. Death itself had not been eliminated, but the fear of death had been transcended through understanding of consciousness that persisted beyond physical existence. The Uzumaki Clan's true power, he said, reading names that were carved not just in granite, but in the fundamental structure of reality itself, was never about sealing or binding. It was about understanding the connections that make existence meaningful. Through the network of enhanced consciousness, every being who chose to participate could feel the truth of those words. The legacy of the Uzumaki clan was not the power to control others, but the wisdom to empower others to control themselves. The transformation was complete, but it was also just the beginning. An infinite universe now existed where consciousness could evolve freely, where transcendence was available to all who sought it, and where the ancient cycles of violence and suffering could finally give way to cycles of growth, understanding, and limitless possibility. In dimensions both near and far, beings looked toward a future that held promise rather than threat, hope rather than despair, and the endless potential for consciousness itself to become everything it had always been capable of being. The Uzumaki legacy lived on, not in any single individual, but an eternal possibility for every consciousness to transcend its current limitations while remaining true to its essential nature. The story of ultimate power had become the story of ultimate freedom, and the universe itself was forever changed by the choice to trust consciousness with its own evolution. In this world, Naruto was not just a child of prophecy. He was a living embodiment of the Uzumaki's will, a legacy of chains, seals, and sacrifice, carried forward by one boy who turned a forgotten name into legend. If you enjoyed it, hit that like button, subscribe, and join the community by sharing your own what if ideas down below. Thank you for watching, and see you on the next one.